In the Japanese countryside where there were lots of rice fields, a man quit his job and started farming in a small town. After finishing tending to some eggplants, Jin Mita could tell it was time to harvest. He left the greenhouse and headed to check the rice fields. In one of the rice fields, a bird noticed something unusual in the mud: a blonde girl wearing armor. Normally, rice fields are home to snails and tadpoles with birds preying on them. So when Jin saw something shiny in his rice field, he thought someone had illegally dumped something there. He quickly ran to catch the culprit. However, his surprise was beyond words when he discovered a collapsed female knight instead. The girl moaned in pain, and Jin wondered how a foreign cosplayer ended up in the countryside. Trying to wake her up, he was relieved as the female knight slowly regained consciousness. Taking a closer look, he noticed her fair skin, long golden hair, and clear emerald eyes. Jin had never seen such beauty before. He had asked the girl if she understood him. The girl got flustered, wondering who Jin was, and told him to stay away. Jin couldn't believe it. He was the one being treated suspiciously when it was his property that had been trespassed. The girl wondered where she was and who Jin was again. Jin got angry since he should be the one asking questions. He explained that they were on his rice field and asked what the girl was doing on his property. The confused girl looked around and was visibly surprised. Jin noticed that the girl hadn't come on her own volition and realized it was not good to get involved with her. Jin walked away, telling the girl not to trespass and bother other people. The girl stopped him and asked for the name of the place. Jin got confused and wondered if the girl was still half asleep. Seeing the girl serious, Jin told her that they were in Japan. The girl got confused since she hadn't heard of such a country. Now Jin was more confused and wondered if the girl was alright. He then asked for the girl's name and where she came from. The girl introduced herself as Seraphim Stadfeld, the eldest daughter of the knight family serving the kingdom of Pahoria. Upon hearing her words, Jin became really confused. He had never heard such words before. Seraphim was shocked because their kingdom was a major power and even a farmer would know about it. Jin claimed he didn't, and he wondered if Seraphim was one of those cosplayers who were into role-playing just like in anime. Seraphim felt offended upon hearing unfamiliar words and couldn't believe a mere farmer dared to mock a knight. As Seraphim tried to unsheath her sword, she stopped and wobbled. She realized that due to the continuous subjugations she hadn't been able to sleep lately. She slowly closed her eyes and fell unconscious. Leaving her under the blazing sun was a no-no, so Jin didn't have a choice but to do something. Seraphim woke up to a lovely scene surrounded by unfamiliar creature sounds, flowing water and rustling grass. Jin was carrying her, and when they reached a fancy Japanese house, he sighed in relief. Seraphim asked where they were, and Jin said it was his place. He told her to rest, but soon asked her to get off because her armor was too heavy. Jin then noticed how weighty the armor was, thinking it was just for cosplay. He marveled at Seraphim's strength as she effortlessly jumped over a tall wall, making him realize how impressive cosplayers are these days. Seraphim marveled at the size of the house Jin led her to. He urged her to go inside, and when she saw the interior, she was surprised that a farmer could own such a fancy house. Jin explained that it was just an ordinary house you could find anywhere. Despite her doubts, Seraphim entered, but Jin quickly cautioned her to remove her shoes and dirty armor. Now without her armor, Seraphim looked around, and Jin couldn't help but notice how much she resembled a foreign celebrity. Taking note of how wet she was, Jin suggested she take a bath, leaving Seraphim astonished. She couldn't believe a farmer's house would have a bath. Jin, slightly irritated, asserted that he was not poor and proceeded to fill the tub with hot water. Seraphim was impressed and asked about the magic tool on the wall, which turned out to be just a water heater according to Jin. She was surprised to find such advanced tools in a farmer's house, and even tried the nearby faucet, accidentally turning on the shower and getting her clothes wet. Jin scolded her for playing around, and Seraphim admitted she had never seen such things before. Jin was confused, assuming that even foreigners should know these basic things. Puzzled by Seraphim's reactions, Jin wondered about her previous life. He asked again, and Seraphim genuinely apologized, asking him to teach her. Jin couldn't believe someone was asking him to teach them how to take a bath. He realized Seraphim was not lying and offered to get her some clothes and a towel. Grateful, Seraphim asked Jin to call her Sarah and thanked him for his help. Seeing her expression, Jin blushed and decided to think things over later, as Sarah didn't seem like a bad person at all. Sarah looked around and took off her clothes. After undressing, she stepped into the bath and tried out the shower. Eventually, she got used to it and decided to take a dip in the bathtub. As she started to feel relaxed, a sudden drip of water caught her by surprise. It was then that she noticed the window and enjoyed the pleasant view. Meanwhile, Jin Mita, a 29-year-old man with no prior girlfriend experience, struggled to choose clothes for Sarah. The best option he had was his tracksuit. He delivered the tracksuit and a towel to the dressing room. Suddenly, Sarah came out from the bath, completely naked and defenseless. The two locked eyes until Sarah let out a loud scream. Jin quickly exited and apologized, explaining that he hadn't intended to peek. Sarah eventually calmed down and assured Jin that she knew he had no ill intentions. Jin was relieved and Sarah told him to forget about it. Jin then reminded her about the towel and clothes. Shortly after, Sarah showed up in the living room, catching Jin off guard. Jin then saw Sarah fresh out of the bath wearing his old clothes. Sarah thanked him for the comfy outfit. Jin was surprised to see the unfashionable tracksuit looking stylish on Sarah. Sarah sat across from Jin, and he noticed the melons in front of him. Trying not to make it obvious that he noticed them, Jin suggested they eat something. Sarah hesitated to refuse his offer, but then her stomach rumbled, embarrassing her. Deciding to cook, Jin found only leftover miso soup and marinated veggies. Adding some eggs, he started cooking. Sarah, hearing the sounds of his cooking, offered to help, but Jin insisted she relax as his guest. He assured her he was just making simple dishes, and soon the savory aroma filled the room. Jin plated the heated miso and finished cooking the rice. Sarah endured her growling stomach until Jin returned with various simple dishes, surprising her. She wondered if it was okay to eat such fancy food, but Jin explained it was just leftovers. Suddenly, Sarah's expression changed and she questioned whether she should use her hands to eat. Jin suggested chopsticks, realizing it might be challenging for a foreigner. He then got a knife and fork and Sarah thanked him. Jin wondered why Sarah, despite speaking Japanese, wasn't familiar with Japanese cuisine, finding her a mystery. Jin began eating and Sarah felt confused about Jin's words. He clarified that it was like a prayer to express gratitude for the food. Sarah was surprised to learn about this custom and followed suit. Jin was amazed by Sarah's beauty. When she asked about the white grain, Jin explained it was rice he had harvested from fields similar to where Sarah had collapsed. Initially curious, she took a spoonful of rice and found it delicious, much to Jin's joy. Jin suggested trying it with other dishes, and Sarah happily paired it with sautéed eggplant. Pleased with the combination, she continued enjoying the meal. Jin was happy to see her savoring the food. Sarah then tasted the miso soup and found it delightful, with Jin confirming her observation. The soup brought her comfort. Reflecting on the moment, Jin realized it had been years since he had shared a meal with someone. The two finished their meal, and Sarah enjoyed some tea. Then she realized something and asked for Jin's name. Jin introduced his full name, but Sarah misunderstood it as one whole name. Jin explained what his surname and given name were. Surprised, Sarah wondered if Jin was a noble, but Jin clarified that nobles don't exist in Japan and everyone has surnames. Sarah was confused. Jin then wondered how long Sarah would keep acting as a female knight. Sarah exclaimed that she was not pretending and was a real knight. However, Jin was distracted by a grain of rice stuck to her mouth. Sarah cleaned her face and Jin was unsure what to do. He sat down and asked where Sarah came from. Sarah explained that she was in the forests of Suiga region in the Leforia kingdom. Seeing Jin confused, Sarah decided to give a proper explanation. However, Jin pointed out that there was another grain of rice on her face. In the forest of the Suiga region, a bunch of monsters once confronted a team of knights. Sarah stood watch, shielding her wounded teammates. Seeing their exhaustion, Sarah clenched her teeth and bravely attacked the monsters. Startled, her teammates watched as she urged them to retreat while she drew the monsters away. Sarah separated from her team, leading the monsters to a different area. She fought tirelessly until she became weary. She couldn't remember where she passed out, but she eventually woke up in the middle of Jin's rice field. In the present moment, Jin listened to everything, but he couldn't grasp any of it. Sarah suggested that advanced magic might have caused her to be relocated. Jin, however, was certain that Suig or Leforia wasn't real, but Sarah disagreed. Concerned for her squad mates, Sarah expressed worry. Jin tried to find a solution and remembered the map. Sarah thought it might be another magic tool, but Jin explained it was a common information tool in the modern era. Jin then showed Sarah the world map. Surprised, Sarah pointed out that the Leforia kingdom wasn't on it. Jin noticed her reaction and Sarah silently stood up, leaving Jin confused. Before leaving, Sarah thanked Jin for everything. Jin had tried to ask where she was going as Sarah put on her armor again. She said she was going back to her kingdom to meet up with her friends. Jin tried to stop her, but Sarah quickly jumped away. Jin was left speechless. Sarah said she wouldn't forget the favor and left in a hurry, leaving a cloud of dust behind like a charging bull. Jin was shocked because what Sarah did wasn't something normal for cosplayers anymore. Jin thought about Sarah's stories and decided to forget them since Sarah had already left. Jin then looked at the time and suddenly remembered that he needed to deliver the produce to a wholesaler. Jin had gone to his greenhouse to gather some produce. Despite finding Sarah's cosplay odd, he chose to push those thoughts aside. While harvesting, he noticed a cucumber that triggered thoughts of Sarah's sword, but he quickly reminded himself to forget about her. Later at dusk, Jin delivered his harvest to the wholesaler and headed home. During the drive, he realized that the day had left him more exhausted than usual. Planning to end the night with some beer, he had to abruptly stop his car to avoid hitting someone. Annoyed, he scolded the person, only to discover it was Sarah. Observing her blank and then sad expression, Jin parked and approached her. With tears in her eyes, Sarah noticed Jin. He inquired if she had found what she was looking for, and she revealed she couldn't locate the kingdom, earning surprised looks from others. Jin agreed, noting her unusual attire. Despite her earlier energy, he saw a lingering sadness in Sarah's expression. Recalling her earlier story, he pondered if Sarah might be from another world. Sarah, confused, prompted Jin to explain. He shared his difficulty believing her fantastical tale, but Sarah insisted she wasn't lying, her expression filled with sorrow. Convinced of her honesty, Jin speculated that she might truly come from another world, citing her lack of knowledge about the modern world as a compelling reason. Despite the incredulity of the idea, Sarah had been surprised and chuckled a bit, struggling to believe she had been thrown into another world. She understood that the place was very different from where she came from. She then thanked Jin for trusting her words. The two fell into an awkward silence until Jin suggested Sarah come to his house since it was getting late. Sarah agreed, and Jin drove home with Sarah sitting in the back. Luckily, the road wasn't bumpy, and the night drive continued while Sarah gazed at the night sky. Upon reaching home, Sarah calmed down and decided to sleep early. Jin noticed that Sarah was trying not to show her confusion. He admired how resilient she was. If it were him in her shoes, he would have burst into tears. Sometime after, Rin tried to bring hot water for Sarah but found her quietly crying in a corner. Sarah did her best not to make any noise as tears streamed down her face. Jin decided to give Sarah some space and left her alone for a while. Jin then went to the kitchen and decided to prepare something tasty for the next day. He suddenly remembered how much Sarah enjoyed the miso soup, finding it comforting. Jin marinated fish with koji salted soy sauce, another dish Sarah had liked earlier. Recalling how grateful Sarah had been, he acknowledged he couldn't make anything extravagant, so he decided to prepare a Japanese-style breakfast to recharge Sarah's life points. Morning arrived and Sarah awoke with her hair messy, realizing she'd unintentionally dozed off. Recollecting the events from the day before, anxiety crept in once more. Taking deep breaths, she reminded herself not to dwell on it. Opening the window, she was greeted by a beautiful sight that left her in awe. Just then, a delightful aroma reached her, making her stomach growl. Meanwhile, Jin was getting breakfast ready. Sarah appeared unexpectedly, catching him off guard. Jin realized it had been a while since someone greeted him in the morning. He directed Sarah on where to place the glass he had left near her room. Noticing Sarah's slightly cheerful demeanor, Jin couldn't help but smile. Together they set the table, with Jin finishing up the rice. Miso soup and chopped green onions were added as garnish, completing the Japanese-style breakfast. Sarah's eyes widened as she looked at the breakfast. Jin was happy that his plan had worked to cheer up Sarah. They then ate, and Sarah began with a cherry tomato. She enjoyed the taste and even shared her thoughts. Sarah thought it was a fruit, but Jin corrected her, saying it was a vegetable. Sarah was surprised at how delicious vegetables could be. Jin explained that they were vegetables that couldn't be sold, but Sarah thought they looked great nonetheless. Next, Sarah tried the fish and found the smell pleasant. She had never tasted such fatty fish before. The rice was also something new to her and she enjoyed it a lot. Then she had the miso soup, which she found delicious and soothing. Sarah then mentioned she had never eaten a fish that didn't have a strong fish odor before. Jin explained it was salmon and wondered if they also ate fish in her world. Sarah explained they had a fish called a donko. It was common and cheap, but it had a muddy and persistent raw odor. Jin realized it must be unappetizing, judging by Sarah's expression. Just when Jin found the otherworldly fish interesting, Sarah groaned and wore a disgusted look. She was embarrassed that she couldn't eat salmon cleanly. Jin agreed, mentioning that it was challenging to eat fish with a fork. As a knight, Sarah felt ashamed of herself. Jin had asked for Sarah's plate, and with his chopsticks, he divided the salmon so she could eat it easily. However, Sarah wasn't focused on the fish, instead her attention was on Jin's chopsticks. Jin decided to teach her, starting with the gun finger hand position, which Sarah found strange. He then explained how to hold the chopsticks, and Sarah managed to learn. However, handling the fish proved challenging for her. Jin suggested practicing with cucumbers, and Sarah succeeded. Unfortunately, the cucumber didn't make it to her mouth and fell. Jin burst into laughter and Sarah began to pout. He reassured her, saying she'd improve with practice. Upon hearing Jin's encouragement, Sarah flinched and glanced outside. Realizing he had made a mistake, Jin apologized. He pondered if there was a way for Sarah to return to her original world since she didn't know how she ended up in this world. Sarah speculated that some magical power might have sent her, but she found no traces of magic in Jin's rice field. Jin realized that Sarah had been investigating on her own. Sarah had assured Jin not to worry, saying she had already made up her mind to live in his world. She insisted she was skilled in combat and could easily handle tasks like dealing with monsters such as orcs or goblins to make a living. Jin then explained to Sarah that there were no monsters on Earth, and Japan was one of the safest countries globally. He even mentioned that professions like being a knight didn't exist. Sarah was surprised and concerned about how she would manage to live alone. Despite the unexpected and disheartening news, Sarah decided to search for a job involving hard work or manual labor. Upon hearing this, Jin remembered how Sarah had displayed superhuman abilities the other day. However, he knew that in this world, someone without a family registry might face difficulties in finding a job. Jin could only picture Sarah working in the underground world, but he was worried because she was a girl. Sarah had thanked Jin for the breakfast and attempted to leave on her own. Jin couldn't believe she was rushing things too much. He tried to stop her, but Sarah had already planned to start her own night order, gather mages from Earth and find a way home. As Sarah left through the front door, Jin began to imagine her falling into the dark side. Suddenly, he had an idea. He asked Sarah to live with him. Sarah looked back with an expectant expression. Jin, realizing he sounded like he was proposing, was taken aback. Sarah approached him, questioning if it was really okay to stay with him. Jin, a bit flustered, mentioned that he couldn't offer a high salary and the work would be physically demanding. Sarah agreed as long as she had a place to stay and food to eat. Her face lit up with joy, and Jin realized he could use an extra pair of hands on his farm. He decided to hire Sarah, and the female knight was grateful. For some reason, Jin felt relieved, and that marked the beginning of his cohabitation with a female knight from another world. 3 days earlier, Sarah had her first day helping Jin with farming. However, Jin noticed that Sarah still had her sword with her. She seemed uneasy without it. Jin thought it wasn't a good idea, but Sarah felt comfortable having it. Jin decided to let it be, but reminded her about the Japanese law, which stated that blades longer than 6 centimeters should not be carried around. Sarah was curious about the length and compared it to a kitchen knife. As they worked, Sarah realized how peaceful and free of monsters the earth was. Jin then cautioned her not to casually draw her sword. Jin guided Sarah around until they reached the greenhouse. Inside, Sarah was impressed by the long and healthy eggplants. She marveled at their quality. Jin explained to Sarah how a greenhouse worked, telling her how it could help grow plants even when they weren't in season. Sarah couldn't help but be impressed. Jin learned that Sarah came from a world that seemed like the Middle Ages. Sarah found a long eggplant, and Jin began discussing the different kinds of eggplants that could be grown. Sarah looked at Jin and pointed out how he always became talkative when it came to vegetables. Jin wondered if that was true, and Sarah claimed that he always wore a stone-faced expression. Sarah realized that Jin loved being a farmer. Jin denied it, but Sarah continued to compare him to her being addicted to her sword. Jin had brought out a cart with baskets, catching Sarah's interest. He then explained to Sarah how to harvest the eggplants using a pair of scissors, pointing out which parts to cut to prevent the plants from growing out of control. Nervously, Sarah gave it a try, touching a big smooth eggplant. Following Jin's instructions, she snipped it off. Suddenly, Jin shouted, startling Sarah. Worried she had made a mistake, Sarah was almost teary-eyed. Jin reassured her, laughing and claiming it was fine, just his way of keeping things relaxed. This angered Sarah, and she started to unsheath her sword. In the end, Jin apologized. As the basket started to fill up, Sarah noticed Jin working really fast. Jin explained he had been doing the same thing for years. Determined, Sarah declared she could be just as fast as Jin. Jin, initially worried about living with a new female knight, couldn't help but have fun watching Sarah act clumsily. The eggplants had been harvested and neatly arranged in baskets, which deeply impressed Sarah. Wondering about the next steps, she asked Jin, who explained that they needed to sort the eggplants before sending them out. However, he suggested taking a break for lunch first. Back at home, Sarah eagerly anticipated what Jin would prepare. He decided to make tomato penne with eggplant and tuna. Excited to help, Sarah was handed a peeler by Jin, who casually taught her how to use it. Trying it herself, Sarah found the peeler to be quite handy. Meanwhile, Jin prepared the tuna and started a fire. Sarah complimented Jin on his cooking skills, expressing surprise at a man being so adept in the kitchen. Jin credited his proficiency to years of living alone. Curious about cultural differences, he asked Sarah if it was the same in her world. She explained that in her world, it was considered unmanly for men to cook, and it was typically a task for women. After Sarah finished peeling the vegetables, she asked Jin what to do next. Jin instructed her to cut them diagonally. Since Sarah didn't understand, Jin showed her with a demonstration and explained the concept of cutting diagonally. Excited, Sarah grabbed the kitchen knife, but Jin quickly warned her about the dangerous way she was holding it. Confused, Sarah turned around and asked Jin for guidance on the proper way to hold the knife. Jin was surprised, realizing that Sarah might not have much experience in cooking. Sarah apologized, revealing that she came from a knight's family and had focused on swordplay and horse riding since childhood. She hadn't mentioned it earlier because she was afraid of being kicked out of the kitchen, expressing her genuine desire to learn how to cook. Feeling Sarah's sincerity, Jin sighed and proceeded to demonstrate the correct way to hold the knife, adding some complaints like an old man. During the lesson, their hair accidentally brushed against each other and Jin apologized. The teaching continued, with Sarah even trying out the faucet, which she considered a magical tool. Jin also taught her how to use the stove. Eventually, Jin started cooking and Sarah stood on the side, captivated by the delicious aroma. After a while, the cooking got finished and Sarah's eyes widened as she saw a new dish. She seemed really excited, and they expressed their thanks before digging in. Sarah's heart pounded as she used her fork to grab a slice of eggplant. She could remember the delicious aroma from when it was cooking. Sarah then took a bite, and even though the food was hot, she put the whole slice of eggplant in her mouth. She felt delighted as she savored the flavor. She moved on to the pasta and enjoyed that too. After drinking some water, she claimed it was amazing. Jin mentioned that the tomato sauce went well with the tuna. Sarah complimented the taste of the eggplant that Jin had grown. Jin paused for a moment and told Sarah that this is how he made a living, growing and shipping his vegetables to supermarkets. He mentioned not getting direct feedback before, similar to how Sarah had just told him about the eggplants. Jin tried to thank Sarah, but the eager eater asked for more servings. Meanwhile, at a candy store, an elderly lady told a girl named Keiho that she had heard Jin had married someone from another country. Keiho was really surprised by this and insisted it couldn't be true. The old lady was puzzled because she overheard someone saying they saw Jin walking around with a blonde woman recently. At the same time, a group of female students had just finished their classes. The youngest, Alice, asked her two friends if the rumor about Jin getting married was true. She had heard it from her mom and aunt. Meguru and Kotori glanced at each other and firmly said there was no way it could be true. Shortly after, Kotori wondered if it was okay to suddenly visit Jin's place. Meguru knew that Kotori was also curious, but Kotori was concerned. Meguru said they had already walked quite a bit and should go congratulate Jin. She reminded Kotori that Alice had also suggested visiting. The two quickly arrived at Jin's house and called out to him, but there was no response. They wondered where Jin had gone so early in the morning. Meanwhile, in a different house, Jin looked very confused. He watched as Sarah fixed roof tiles. Minori called out to Sarah, who claimed that Jin, her husband, seemed worried. Sarah's words brought different reactions from her and Jin. Sarah tried to explain, but Jin went toward her instead. Shigeru, Minori's husband, silently observed them. Let's go back 2 hours earlier. Sarah went out for her daily walk to stay in shape. Jin was worried, but Sarah claimed she needed to be familiar with the area in case monsters attacked. Jin told her to make sure to be back before work started. Sarah then went off on her own and didn't return. Jin had gone out to search for Sarah, wondering where she had disappeared to. He remembered teaching her about clocks, but she was always confident in her sense of time. Concerned that Sarah might be lost, Jin was approached by an old woman, Minori. Despite not being little, she affectionately called Jin little as usual. Minori, Jin's neighbor who used to take care of him as a baby, explained that Jin's wife was helping them, shedding light on why Sarah was taking so long to return. Jin sighed, realizing the reason for the delay. Now we find Jin in the present, staring blankly at an embarrassed Sarah. His attention was momentarily diverted by the repaired roof tiles. As Sarah tried to explain, Jin pondered whether she knew how to fix a roof, considering she was from another world. Sarah mentioned that Shigeru had taught her, and Jin was surprised at how quickly she had learned. She also claimed to have received training from military engineers. Jin had asked Sarah how she became his wife. Sarah, feeling a bit embarrassed, dropped the hammer she was holding and explained that she just went along with things. Jin was curious about how it all happened. A while back, Minori noticed Sarah coming from Jin's house and wondered if she was his wife. Caught off guard, Sarah simply nodded. Jin thought it was a bit too much, but Sarah didn't know what else to do, especially since the older couple knew Jin well. She believed a weak lie wouldn't work, and being his wife seemed like the best option. Jin was visibly flustered, and he knew the older couple wouldn't buy the story of her being from another world. Jin then noticed the intense gazes from Minori and Shigeru, who were proud to see their little Jin flirting with his supposed wife. Sarah wondered if Jin was uncomfortable with people thinking she was his wife. After a pause, Jin admitted he wasn't against it. Rather, he was concerned about Sarah being labeled as his wife. Sarah explained that her otherworldly story wouldn't work in their situation, so pretending to be Jin's wife was the easiest way for her to stay in his house without causing any issues with the locals. Jin thought it wasn't a bad idea since people in the countryside were sensitive to outsiders. However, he was worried about how Sarah felt in this arrangement. Sarah clarified that although she was known as Jin's wife, she requested that any physical relationship be off-limits. Jin was taken aback, picturing what Sarah had just said. Blushing for the first time, he exclaimed that he wouldn't make any advances towards her. Shortly after, the newly formed couple completed fixing the roof tiles for the elderly pair. Shigeru expressed his gratitude, and Jin advised him to hire a professional next time. Despite Jin's advice, he sensed that Shigeru might seek their help again. In return for their assistance, Shigeru offered snacks to Jin and Sarah. They took a break on the porch, and Minori treated them to yokan, a Japanese treat unfamiliar to Sarah. Intrigued, she asked Jin about it, and he explained that it's made with red beans and sugar, providing a sweet taste. Though hesitant due to its black color, Jin encouraged Sarah to try it. To her surprise, she found the yokan to be soft and flavorful. Jin, too, was pleasantly surprised by its taste, finding it richer than expected. As Minori served iced green tea, Jin appreciated how it washed away the sweetness, leaving a satisfying sensation in his mouth. He then noticed how quiet Sarah was and discovered her looking elated. Sarah claimed it was incredibly delicious and continued eating. She enjoyed the taste of her second bite and pointed out its gentle sweetness. She explained that sweets in her world were just heavily covered with sugar, and no one could eat more than a single bite. Jin remembered that Japan had those types of candies before. Minori was glad to hear that Sera was enjoying the food and offered more. Sera was taken aback and excitedly wondered if it was really fine. As Sera went to Minori, Shigeru went toward Jin and claimed Minori was enjoying talking with Sera. However, Jin noticed that Sera was only baited with sweets. Shigeru then exclaimed how Jin got himself a great wife. Minori also agreed. Jin knew that it was only their plan to have their couple status as a reason for Sera to stay in his house and went with the conversation's flow, claiming that Sera was a good wife, to the point that she was almost too good for him. Sera started shaking her glass and Jin noticed how flustered his wife was. Jin also got flustered since he thought Sera would be fine with it. The old couple then started asking Jin where he met Sera. Jin didn't answer them and instead told Sera that it was time to go home. Meanwhile, in a store, Keiho checked her phone to see her brother going crazy over the news of Jin having a wife. She couldn't help but laugh. However, her expression suddenly changed. She was also curious about Jin's wife from the rumors. Shortly after, Jin harvested everything he needed. As he pondered moving the hefty baskets to the work table, Sera offered to help. She effortlessly lifted the weighty baskets on her own, surprising Jin. It dawned on him that magic was truly extraordinary. Jin expressed gratitude to Sera for completing the tasks sooner than expected. According to Sera, Earth possessed magic that could only be refined through something known as a magical organ, enhancing her physical abilities. Jin began to wonder if he could use magic, but Sera insisted it was impossible for him. She explained that Jin lacked the magical organ and the necessary training. This left Jin feeling disappointed because he had hoped to use magic for growing vegetables. Sera, however, was relieved that Jin's only intention was to use magic for farming. Just then, someone shouted Jin's name, and Sera wondered if it was an enemy attack. Jin recognized the voice and the living room door opened. A rowdy-looking man appeared and Jin was disappointed to see him. He asked the man to at least ring the doorbell. Jin's childhood friend Kaito came over after hearing about Jin's rumored wife. Jin couldn't believe the rumor had spread so far already. Kaito then grabbed Jin's shoulder and claimed that he thought Jin would be a bachelor for life. He said that assumption would make people around them curious. Sera then came out of the kitchen and her brightness surprised Kaito. Jin introduced Kaito to Sera, and Sera cheerfully introduced herself. Kaito was in disbelief, seeing Jin pick up a beautiful wife out of nowhere. Jin claimed he picked her up from his rice field. Seeing Kaito's reaction, Sera assumed that her identity was being doubted. Sera then grabbed Jin's arm and exclaimed that they were passionately in love with each other. The two men were surprised, and Sera whispered to Jin that she was only trying to convince Kaito. Despite feeling defeated, Kaito noticed Jin's relaxed expression. He smiled and wondered if it was best if he also did farming. Suddenly, a girl began calling for Kaito, upset that she had been left alone to manage the shop. Kaho paused when she noticed Sera, expressing her amazement at seeing the blonde woman. Sera then introduced herself, and after apologizing for her earlier rudeness, Kaho introduced herself as well. The two girls stared at each other and for some reason felt a connection. Kaito wondered if he could stay to learn more about Sera, but Kaho reminded him to take care of his candy store. Sera was curious about the candy store, and as Kaito explained, Keiho pulled Jin aside, claiming she had something to tell him. Jin, noticing Kaho's hesitant expression, wondered what was wrong. He assumed Kaho was suspicious of Sera not being his real wife and tried to come up with an explanation. As Kaho pulled Jin closer and leaned in, he became nervous, thinking Kaho was onto something serious. However, Kaho surprised him by mentioning that Sera wasn't wearing a bra under her clothes. It was a direct and unexpected from Kaho. Jin had confirmed it, and Kaho felt disgusted. She wondered if Jin had some unusual interest because he allowed Sera to go without underwear. Jin explained that there was a complicated reason for it. He had planned to explain it to Sera, but she wasn't yet familiar with Japan and wasn't ready for shopping. Kaho suggested that Jin could have accompanied Sera, but then she realized that it might be embarrassing for a man to shop for women's underwear. So she decided to go with Sera instead. Jin was relieved that Kaho went along, but his childhood friend asked for something in return. Perplexed, Jin reminded her not to choose expensive clothes. Eventually, the Oba siblings returned home to take care of their store. After Jin told Sera that they would go shopping for her clothes, she hesitated since she thought the clothes she was wearing were already fine. However, Jin explained that he needed to buy other things and could easily get the clothes at the same time. Sera found Jin to be kind. While playing around in the bath, Sera left the shower and found Jin telling her that Keiho had just come to pick them up. Sera was surprised and Jin wondered what was wrong. Sera was taken aback seeing Jin in different clothes. Jin agreed, explaining he usually wore simple or work clothes and suggested they get the same type for Sera. Keiho arrived and left the driving to Jin. She expressed concern about Sera's sword, but Jin assured her it was a tradition from Sera's country and just a toy. They all got into the car and Sera found it amazing. Kaho helped her with the seatbelt and guessed Sera's bust size, leaving Jin flustered. As Jin drove, Kaho chatted with Sera, who was amazed by the fields and scenery passing by while leaning on the car window. Jin noticed and opened the window. letting the wind surprise Sarah, who enjoyed the breeze. Jin, once again captivated by Sarah's beauty, was reminded by Keiho to focus on the road. Keiho suggested playing games on the way. Soon after, they arrived at their destination, and Keiho was excited to visit the store she had in mind. Sarah stood still, staring at the huge building in front of her. She didn't expect a shopping mall to be so massive and even mistook a person in an advertisement for the owner. Sarah felt amazed when she entered the shopping mall, wondering if she was in a big city. Jin assured her it was still a countryside town. Seeing Sarah's excitement, Keiho wondered if it was her first time in a shopping mall. Jin quickly made up an excuse, saying Sarah's previous home was in the middle of nowhere. He asked Keiho to take care of Sarah, who didn't know much, and Keiho agreed. Jin was impressed by Keiho's quick thinking. As Sarah marveled at the decorations, she even thought there might be mages on Earth and mistook Colonel Sanders' statue for a hero statue. Jin noticed this and pulled Sarah away, reminding her of her situation and Keiho's sharpness. When Keiho returned, she informed them that the clothing store was on the 3rd floor and suggested using the escalator. Jin noticed Sarah trying to contain her amazement and explained how the escalator works. He also realized that Sarah was attracting a lot of attention, and he understood why. Later on the 3rd floor, Sarah noticed that people had been staring at her a lot. Keiho pointed out that it had been happening since they entered the mall. Sarah argued that other women were wearing beautiful clothes while she was just in ordinary attire. Keiho agreed, considering the tracksuit was meant for exercise, but then she realized that it was Sarah's sword that was attracting attention. Trying to figure out a solution, Keiho thought about the importance of Sarah's family traditions. She suggested going shopping for trendy clothes to address the issue. Sarah was surprised and thanked Keiho. It was at this moment that Keiho realized Sarah was talking like a samurai. Jin was happy that the girls got along well. He knew there were many things he couldn't do for Sarah. They reached a store filled with women's undergarments, making Sarah uneasy about where they were. Keiho explained that they were there to buy undergarments for Sarah. A store employee appeared to take Sarah's measurements, making her nervous. Jin tried to leave and Sarah wondered why. He explained that men weren't suited for such stores. Sarah felt defeated, and Jin understood her feelings. Keiho suggested Jin sit on a bench outside so Sarah could see him. Jin hesitated, feeling like he might seem creepy. Keiho reminded him to do it for his wife, and despite feeling awkward, Jin agreed to wait on the bench while the girls shopped. Sarah calmed down and the store employee assisted her. Sitting on the nearby bench, Jin worried if his budget would be enough as the girls planned to buy a lot, including Keiho's request for her own clothes. Being close by, Jin overheard the girls discussing sizes and types of undergarments, which made him uncomfortable. The situation became noisy when the store employee checked Sarah more closely, adding to Jin's awkward feelings. The girls had finished their shopping quickly. Sarah was excited about how useful undergarments could be. She apologized when Keiho pointed out that the shopkeeper might have influenced her. Keiho mentioned they should buy casual clothes next. Jin, realizing Sarah didn't bring anything with her, became worried about his wallet. Keiho decided to find high-quality but affordable clothes for Sarah so she wouldn't feel guilty about buying expensive ones. This decision was not great news for Jin's wallet. At a nearby clothing store, Keiho made Sarah try on various casual clothes. She complimented Sarah's figure, making her try even more outfits. Jin was getting anxious about his expenses. In the end, Sarah only bought a few clothes, considering the burden on Jin. Keiho insisted it was only the bare minimum, though Jin saw 2 huge bags. Sarah was already thinking about how to use her work pay to compensate Jin. Jin suggested buying necessities next, but Keiho reminded him about her share of the expenses. The trio then ventured into an expensive brand store. Keiho was excited to go in, and Jin explained to Sarah that it was a luxury store. Sarah realized the clothes there were unlike any she'd seen as a knight. She noticed a dress and remembered how she used to want one. Keiho suggested trying it on, and despite Sarah's attempts to decline and ask for Jin's help, Keiho was insistent. 5 minutes later, Keiho came out while wearing a jacket, but Jin insisted it was too large for her. Keiho got upset, explaining it was the latest fashion trend and called Jin useless for being too accustomed to countryside living. Jin then sought out Sarah and Keiho went to fetch her. She dragged Sarah out of the dressing room and Jin's eyes widened. Sarah looked stunning in a one-piece dress, leaving Jin speechless. Feeling embarrassed, Sarah suggested she might look silly in such clothes since she was a knight. In a serious tone, Jin assured Sarah that she looked good. Teasingly, Keiho told Sarah that Jin was completely smitten when she walked out. Jin's words triggered memories for Sarah of her days training as a knight. She had always believed knight armor was sufficient, but now she was grateful that she looked good in the dress. Keiho then pulled Sarah away to try on more clothes, and observing Sarah's expression, Jin felt pleased. Shopping for clothes had ended, and Jin was impressed by how Keiho had spent money. Keiho wondered if it was okay that Sarah hadn't bought the dress, but Sarah was content just trying it on. Suddenly, Jin handed Sarah a bag, saying it was the one-piece dress she had tried on earlier and he felt like buying it. Sarah thanked Jin and exclaimed that she would treasure it forever. Jin was pleased. Kaho then suggested that Sarah ask for more clothes before declaring it would last forever. The three of them went to the supermarket and Kaho went alone to get some toiletries. Jin was worried because he knew Kaho was going to buy a lot, and she asked him to help later. Sarah wondered who Kaho was buying for, and Jin explained it was for the elderly in their town. Sarah was impressed with how thoughtful Kaho was towards others. As the couple explored the supermarket, Sarah noticed some familiar eggplants. Jin mentioned that his vegetables were being sold there. Sarah was amazed to see the vegetables she knew from Jin's farm in such a big market. Jin told her not to overreact. Just then, a mother was delighted to find that eggplants from Mita farm had been restocked. Sarah was impressed. Even though there were many farms in the area, the fact that Jin's vegetables were in the supermarket meant they were delicious. Jin wondered if that was true, and Sarah encouraged him to be more proud. Jin still wasn't used to Sarah being direct with her words. Sarah decided to buy the sealed eggplants they had harvested. Shortly after, Kaho met up with the couple and exclaimed about her hunger. Jin suggested getting something to eat, and they found themselves in the midst of a food court filled with tempting aromas. Sarah couldn't help but wonder if every visible spot was occupied by restaurants. Jin took a moment to explain the workings of a food court, while a famished Kaho had already claimed her seat. Contemplating her food choices, Sarah decided to follow Jin's advice and opt for something she wouldn't typically have at home, recalling a craving for bread. Entering a bit of a predicament, Sarah encountered a McDonald's employee who warmly greeted her with a menu card. Confusion struck as Sarah was faced with an array of bread options. She attempted to seek Jin's assistance, but he was determined to let her navigate the otherworldly experience on her own. Lacking clear instructions, Sarah felt a wave of anxiety but decided to nod as if she had everything under control. Turning to the employee for help, she asked for a suggestion on a delicious choice. The employee recommended the teriyaki burger, and Sarah's eyes lit up. Relieved, she placed her order, grateful to move past the earlier stress. However, another challenge arose when the employee inquired about turning it into a meal set and upgrading the drink. Sarah found herself at a loss for words, mumbling something that led the employee to assume she wanted the meal set. Further inquiries about drink and fries sizes left Sarah blank, and Jin noticed that things weren't going too smoothly. 5 minutes later, Sarah received her order and happily discovered the existence of meal sets. Kaho then called the couple over, finding her already done with her meal, a big bowl of tempura shrimp. Jin placed the chilled udon he ordered on the table, prepared the sauce, and began to eat with audible slurping. Sarah couldn't help but wonder about his eating manners. Kaho reassured her that it was normal to eat udon noodles the way Jin was doing it. Suddenly, Jin realized that Sarah hadn't tried udon noodles before. Kaho suggested sharing some with Sarah, who felt a bit flustered at the idea of using the same chopsticks Jin had just used. Jin quickly apologized when he realized the situation. Kaho playfully questioned why the two were concerned about an indirect kiss when they were already married. Sarah remembered Jin's remark about Kaho being sharp and decided to endure the embarrassment, telling herself it didn't really count as a real kiss. Jin checked if she was sure, and Sarah blushed. Despite the awkward moment, she could barely taste the food afterward. The following day, Sarah woke up to Jin calling her name. He told her that they had done something, making Sarah curious and flustered. Jin explained they shared a direct kiss. Sarah argued they only did it to avoid Kaho's suspicions. Jin insisted they should do it properly and brought out udon noodles. Trying to feed Sarah, he woke her up from the dream. Suddenly, Jin rushed in asking what happened. Sarah questioned if he brought udon noodles. Confused, Jin reminded her about going to Kaho's place. Grateful for Kaho's help, Sarah quickly got ready and left. Jin was puzzled about why Sarah mentioned udon noodles so early in the morning. Shortly after, Sarah came out of the house wearing her new casual clothes. As always, she carried her sword. Jin was surprised by her beauty once more, and Sarah questioned if anything was amiss. Jin assured her that she looked normal, and Sarah was relieved to hear that. The two then walked to Kaho's house. During the journey, Sarah appreciated the morning views. Meanwhile, Jin thought about farm tasks, enjoying the pleasant temperature. Suddenly, Sarah noticed something in the nearby trees and warned Jin. At the age of 29, Jin found himself being carried through the air by a female knight. He wondered why Sarah was alarmed. The female knight then drew her sword as something approached. However, it turned out to be just a green frog that Sarah called Grenouille. Despite Jin insisting that there were no monsters, Sarah thought it was one. Jin playfully tapped her head, explaining that it was just a normal frog, a common animal. Sarah was surprised, believing it was a monster, but Jin pointed out they were on a sidewalk. Curious, Jin wondered how Grenouille looked in Sarah's world. She explained that frog monsters there could grow up to 5 meters, capable of swallowing humans and livestock whole. She mentioned a mission where she messed up with giant Grenouille. Sensing Sarah's trauma, Jin reassured her that Earth's frogs were harmless and advised her to conceal her powers. A frog nearby croaked, startling Sarah. She suggested moving forward, and Jin, being mischievous, decided to poke the frog. The frightened frog jumped, causing Sarah to freak out. Her knees gave out as the frogs approached. Jin laughed and playfully wondered how Sarah would handle working in the paddies. In response, Sarah pulled out her sword, offering to demonstrate how she dealt with frog monsters in her home world. Realizing he had made a mistake, Jin started running away. The couple had reached the sweet store and the Oba siblings greeted them warmly. Sarah felt thrilled to see Kaho, and Jin noticed how close the two were when Kaho gave Sarah a hug. Kaho expressed that her stress was melting away as she treated Sarah like a pet. She was happy to see Sarah wearing the clothes they had bought, and envied how Sarah could make a simple outfit look stylish. Kaho was surprised that Sarah had come over just to thank her, and Sarah emphasized the importance of expressing gratitude, which Kaho agreed with. Kaido had ended them and introduced his store. Jin mentioned that they had only come to thank Kaho, but Sarah suddenly became interested in the store. Everyone went inside except for Kaho. Inside, Sarah was amazed at the variety of sweets. Kaido mentioned that the store's sweets used to cost only 10 yen, and Jin explained it by comparing it to the hamburger she had bought the other day. Sarah was surprised that the sweets were inexpensive, and Kaito mentioned it was mostly because their customers were children. Kaito then shared the story of how he and Jin went on a sweets hunting adventure. He mentioned that Jin personally liked the Umibo with regional and seasonal exclusive flavors. Intrigued, Jin suggested that Sarah try one. To everyone's shock, Jin pulled out a 10,000 yen bill. Sarah wondered if she could spend it all on sweets, and Jin reminded her not to. He clarified that it was Sarah's pay and told her to use it however she wanted when he wasn't around. Sarah was amazed to receive her first paycheck and promptly used it to buy an Umibo. Kaito also suggested buying something, and Jin smiled as he reminisced about his childhood with Kaito, deciding to buy something as well. Shortly after, Sarah gazed at the goodies she'd acquired from the candy store and felt fortunate. Jin wondered which treat Sarah would sample first, and she selected the sour gumball that Kaito had recommended. Jin speculated whether they might play a game, and Kaito suggested it. As Sarah was unfamiliar with the game, Kaito explained that there were 3 candies, with one of them being sour. The objective was to guess who got the sour one. Kaito hinted that maintaining a poker face even if you got the sour candy was crucial for winning. The trio then popped a gumball into their mouth. While Jin and Kaito seemed unaffected, Sarah clearly displayed signs of having chosen the sour gumball. Despite her best efforts, the boys easily identified her as the one with the sour candy. Sarah was taken aback and realized she wasn't good at the game. At that moment, the trio of girls, Meguru, Katori, and Alice, discovered them. They were astonished to find the rumored couple. The girls bombarded the pair with questions about their relationship. Anticipating trouble, Jin informed Sarah that it was time to head home. However, the girls didn't let them go that easily because they really wanted to meet Jin's wife. They kept asking Sarah questions, and Jin told them to go away. Katori said everyone was just surprised, and Kaito said it was because the antisocial Jin had just gotten married. Jin wondered how many people the old couple had told about him and Sarah. The situation annoyed Jin, so he took out a 500 yen coin. The kids were shocked, but Jin gave it to them to buy some candies and left. He was relieved that the kids were easy to bribe. Kaito thanked Jin for the continued support at his store and gave him a bottle of Ramune. Jin thanked him, but Kaito made it clear that Jin would pay, and Sarah got hers for free. Sarah held the bottle high and looked at it with amazement. She found the liquid inside pretty, and Jin explained what it was and how to drink it. Jin then popped in the marble, and Sarah found it fascinating. Sarah also did the same with her Ramune bottle, wondering if they could take out the marble after drinking. Suddenly, Kaito appeared and explained the quality of the marble. He also got his own Ramune, and the 3 clinked their bottles. Everyone drank their Ramune. Jin and Kaito felt refreshed, but Sarah started coughing. Her tongue felt like it was stinging, and Jin explained it was Sarah's first time drinking a carbonated drink. He told her to relax, assuring her she would get used to it soon. Sarah was enlightened. Kaito apologized, not knowing about her inexperience. Sarah took another sip but still couldn't handle the fizzy feeling. The girls came out of the store and invited Sarah to join them, but Jin refused. The girls then brought out their sweets, comparing them with Sarah's. Sarah asked for their names, and the girls introduced themselves. Jin was glad to see Sarah socializing and left her with them. Jin sat on another bench while the girls chatted about sweets. Kaito then remarked that the scene reminded him of the days when they bought sweets with a limited allowance but still enjoyed bickering around. Such memories led Kaito to run a candy store. Jin now understood why Kaito continued the business despite losing money. Kaito mentioned he was doing side hustles too. Jin found Kaito amazing in his own way. Kaito, surprised, stared weirdly at Jin and claimed he had changed. He recalled how Jin used to be super antisocial, never came to his place, and even ignored the kids before. He assumed Jin changed thanks to a certain someone. Sarah then approached him, excited about winning a free gumball after opening a package. Jin just smiled and wondered who had changed him. In July, Sarah, Jin, and Kaito went to get bamboo on a specific day. Jin reminded them of Shigeru's instructions. Kaito, being like an experienced bamboo cutter, assured them to let him handle it. Jin instructed Sarah to go in a different direction. Sarah questioned whether they could actually use the bamboo for making noodles. A few hours ago, Jin found himself in a situation during a specific time of the year. He had received a large amount of summon noodles, and eating them for several days would eventually make him tired of it. Sarah remembered Jin mentioning that sending summon noodles as a midsummer gift was a tradition. Jin then explained that when boiled, summon noodles become longer, symbolizing the maintenance of long relationships with people you don't often meet. Jin was surprised by the quantity he received. Suddenly, Kaito appeared with even more summon noodles, claiming that they would enjoy an even longer eternal relationship. He came over to share the noodles as payback from last year when Jin complained that it was too much to eat. This time Jin assumed it would be different since he had Sarah, thinking she could eat a lot. Sarah got flustered and claimed she didn't know how to feel. Nonetheless, she wanted to try summon noodles for the first time. Upon hearing this, Kaito got excited and suggested giving Sarah a real Japanese cultural experience, the flowing noodles. Back in the present, Jin successfully cut down a bamboo. To support Kaito's sudden idea, Shigeru allowed them to cut some bamboo from his thicket. Out of nowhere, Sarah got curious about whether she could cut down the remaining bamboos. Jin was surprised and wondered if Sarah would use her sword. Sarah confidently stated that she could cut faster than their tools, but Jin had his doubts. She insisted that cutting down a tree was easy for a knight like her, so Jin reluctantly agreed to let Sarah take a shot at cutting the bamboo. Sarah unsheathed her sword and took a serious stance, shocking Jin with her focused expression. With a swift slash, Sarah brought down multiple bamboo, and Jin noticed how clean the cuts were compared to using a saw. Just as Jin began to acknowledge Sarah as an impressive knight, he caught a glimpse of her looking fully refreshed. It dawned on Jin that Sarah had used efficiency as an excuse. She was actually eager to swing her sword. When questioned, Sarah tried to come up with a reason but eventually confessed that she simply wanted to enjoy a nostalgic swing. Jin understood that Sarah's skill was a result of her daily routine, and he realized how challenging it must be for her to hold back on such a thing. At that moment, Kaito came running over when he heard loud thuds. He was amazed to see that they had met their quota and proposed taking everything back. Sarah volunteered to carry the bamboo to the car. Kaito thought it might be tough for Sarah, but she effortlessly handled everything, leaving Kaito in shock. Jin advised Kaito not to overthink things. The trio soon reached Minori and Shigeru's place. Shigeru expressed gratitude and suggested preparing the flowing noodles. Kaito eagerly brought out more tools, surprising Sarah since the tools didn't seem like typical cooking utensils. Wondering if they were meant for something unusual, Jin and Kaito exchanged glances, emitting a threatening vibe. They wondered if Sarah could keep up, causing the female knight to feel concerned. The two guys were really excited about working on something. Sarah felt a bit anxious, wondering if making flowing noodles meant they were going to fight. Then they began working on the bamboo, and Sarah sat there watching, completely clueless. Minori wondered if the guys were just teasing her. When Sarah asked what flowing noodles were, Minori told her to wait and see, saying that Jin and Kaito were just eager to prepare them for Sarah. Sarah then looked at Jin and got flustered. She asked if she could help, and Minori suggested she assist in boiling the noodles. Later on, Jin and Kaito completed the apparatus for making noodles. Sarah was impressed to see the bamboo transformed into something else. Minori mentioned that the condiments were ready. Kaito was already hungry, and Jin hoped he could handle noodles from 3 families. Jin handed Sarah her dipping sauce and explained that noodles would flow down the bamboo and she needed to use her chopsticks to pick them up. Sarah was fascinated and eager to start. Jin had placed summon noodles on a bamboo slide, letting them flow down. Kaito instructed Sarah to catch them. With a serious expression, Sarah used her chopsticks to grab a few strands, but Jin reassured her, saying it was okay since she was still getting used to chopsticks. Minori assured there was more, and Kaito was already asking for seconds. Despite several attempts, Sarah struggled to catch the noodles and started feeling disappointed. Minori suggested teaching her while dropping the noodles. Jin then showed Sarah how to hold the chopsticks, wondering why she couldn't eat in a more normal way. Jin encouraged her to try again, mentioning that this activity was a summer tradition in Japan. Minori dropped the noodles. Jin guided Sarah on the timing, and this time Sarah successfully picked up the somen noodles. She looked at them, dipped them in sauce, slurped them, and exclaimed how delicious they were. Sarah was happy to have finally succeeded, appreciating not only the taste but also the overall experience. She thanked Jin with a smile, and despite his usual stone-faced expression, Jin seemed pleased. Kaito reminded Jin to eat while Sarah confidently showcased her newfound skills. Eventually, the trio turned the noodle-eating activity into a friendly competition. Shortly after, the couple got ready to harvest tomatoes. Jin told Sarah to pick the tomatoes by hand and trim the overgrown stems with scissors. Sarah happily agreed, leaving Jin curious about her joy in just picking tomatoes. Out of the blue, Sarah screamed and Jin hurried over. Sarah, holding a green tomato, worried that it was sick, assuming it should be red. Jin reassured her, suggesting they deliver the green tomatoes as they would ripen during the journey. He explained that some fruits and veggies mature after picking and mentioned the importance of timing. In the current hot season, tomatoes would ripen quickly, so picking them while green was a good idea. relieved that the tomatoes weren't sick. Sarah felt glad and Jin questioned if she was ready for the challenge. Sarah had started picking the tomatoes and imagined them being lined up in the market. As she picked, she noticed a red tomato and excitedly told Jin. Jin said they wouldn't sell it, they could either put it in the honesty box or eat it themselves. Sarah couldn't resist staring at the red tomato. It looked so ripe and tempting. Despite her eagerness to eat it, Jin reminded her to finish working first. It didn't take them long to finish harvesting and Jin noticed Sarah's excitement to try the tomatoes. Sarah handed Jin another ripe tomato she had picked, and they cooled it down with water. Once it was chilled, the couple found a spot with a cooler breeze, sat under a tree shade, and bit into the delicious tomato. Sarah exclaimed about how great it tasted, finding it sweet and enjoyable. The couple remained quiet until Sarah mentioned how tasty the tomatoes were, even better than usual. Jin explained that it wasn't common to have the opportunity to eat freshly picked produce, something unique to the countryside. Sarah now understood why they tasted so good. After finishing their tomatoes, Sarah expressed her desire for more. Jin complained that she had already eaten 4, but Sarah argued that it was better than leaving them on the vines. Jin agreed, acknowledging that leaving too many fruits could harm the plant. He sighed, promising to do better next year. Sarah smiled, appreciating farmers like Jin who make it possible for people to enjoy vegetables they often take for granted. She had initially thought of them as trivial, but her perspective changed after being at Jin's place. She hoped to witness the joy on people's faces as they enjoyed Jin's vegetables. Jin, taken aback, wore a sad expression. Although he had seen Sarah's cheerful face many times, her words touched him. Sarah broke the silence by wondering when their kids, referring to the tomatoes, would make their debut in the supermarket. The time for delivering the tomatoes arrived, and Sarah was curious to see how they were brought in. On the journey, she pondered about the agriculture co-op. Jin explained it as a place where small farmers could sell their crops, borrow tools, or share information. Sarah likened it to an adventurer's guild and wondered if she needed to greet a guildmaster. Jin clarified that there was no such person, and the delivery went well in the end. On the way back, Jin decided to make a stop. The couple ended up at a nearby supermarket and Sarah eagerly explored the surroundings. Unsure of what to buy, Sarah asked Jin for suggestions, but he reminded her they still had ripe tomatoes. Curious about what Sarah wanted to eat, Jin asked, and she bashfully replied that anything he cooked was delicious. Being unfamiliar with Earth's food, Sarah left the choice to Jin, a response that many boyfriends find challenging. "Oh, I apologize. I assume you viewers don't have girlfriends, so you might not relate." Sarah questioned if that was the case, and Jin explained the difficulty lies in deciding what to make. Sarah remembered her mother saying something similar in her homeworld but felt uneasy making demands. Jin assured her that the one preparing the food just wanted to hear it tasted good. Sarah felt enlightened once again and wondered if that had really been the case. As she tried to think of something to eat, Jin insisted he just wanted to shop in a practical way. Sarah was surprised and Jin chuckled. He asked once more what she wanted, and Sarah pondered if tomatoes could be turned into soup. She also fancied some cheese. Hearing Sarah's specific preferences, Jin decided to make chicken tomato soup and stuffed tomatoes. He assured Sarah to look forward to it. Jin swiftly purchased what he needed for dinner. While doing so, he noticed Sarah stuck on something. Sarah mentioned she had a tough time choosing from various types of chocolates. In the end, she opted for all of them, and Jin suggested she should just pick 1 or 2. Sarah seemed disappointed, like a child whose dreams were dashed. The couple continued buying essentials. Suddenly, Sarah spotted some discounted eggs and Jin agreed to purchase them. Sarah's cheerful demeanor brought a smile to Jin's face once again. All of a sudden, a couple of women spotted them and remembered going shopping with their husbands back when they were newlyweds. They then realized it was Jin and politely excused themselves to avoid disturbing the couple on their honeymoon. Sarah returned with the eggs and noticed that Jin seemed quite red. Jin insisted it was nothing and they proceeded to examine the items they had purchased. On the way back, Jin asked what Sarah had gotten in the end. Sarah showed the cube chocolate she had bought. She found the case attractive and cute. Then she unwrapped 1 cube chocolate and ate it, surprised by how sweet it was. Sarah offered some to Jin, but he claimed he was driving, saying he would have some once the traffic light turned red. Just then, Sarah suggested feeding Jin herself. Jin's eyes widened and it felt like the world stopped for a moment. However, he noticed the traffic light and stopped. He exclaimed about how sweet the chocolate was, mentioning it had been a long time for him. Then he noticed Sarah looking red and embarrassed. Jin told her she shouldn't have done it if she would feel embarrassed afterward. Sarah claimed she was acting as Jin's wife and trying to get used to such things. Jin was surprised by her commitment and worried that he might give in. Unbeknownst to them, Kaito and Kaho watched them while the siblings were crossing the road. The two commented on seeing their childhood friend being affectionate with his wife. Jin knew that the two would soon spread strange rumors. Later at home, Sarah happily cleaned the tomatoes for cooking. She was eager to enjoy a meal with a tomato base. Jin then requested her to crush them, catching Sarah off guard. She reacted strongly, feeling a bit upset. However, Jin suggested chopping the tomatoes into pieces and microwaving them before mashing them. Sarah took the lead and Jin noticed she was still getting the hang of using a kitchen knife. After chopping the tomatoes, Jin microwaved them. Meanwhile, they moved on to preparing other ingredients like chicken and onions. Sarah eventually crushed the tomatoes and Jin assured her they would taste even better later. He poured the crushed tomatoes onto the stir-fried chicken and onions. While thinking about the other ingredients, Sarah surprised Jin by handing him the salt. He wondered if she had some kind of mind-reading magic, but Sarah explained she just understood from watching Jin cook many times. Jin was amazed. He then asked Sarah to keep an eye on and stir the tomato stew. As Jin watched Sarah, she looked like a wife cooking for her husband. Jin realized it had been a long time. The next step was making the farcis, and Jin asked Sarah to knead the stuffing. Despite appearing concerned, Sarah kneaded the mixture and found it enjoyable. Jin wondered if cooking was always this much fun. The couple had set the table and placed the cooked chicken tomato stew and tomato farcis on it. Sarah found it interesting that the tomatoes served as the plates for the farcis dressings. However, she was more excited to see the melting cheese on top. Jin also cooked stir-fried tomatoes and eggs and marinated them. However, Sarah was most excited about the main dish bread. Sarah was eager to eat, but Jin realized they had made too much. He didn't notice that he enjoyed cooking with Sarah so much that they ended up with a lot of food. Sarah was confident that they could finish everything, but Jin was worried. Despite Jin's concern, they both gave thanks for the food. Sarah started with the tomato stew and found the soup delicious. While the taste lingered in her mouth, she picked up a piece of bread and enjoyed it. Next, Sarah tried the farcis and also relished their delicious taste. The night continued as the food slowly disappeared from the table. Sarah couldn't even pause her hands as she kept eating. Meanwhile, Jin drank a glass of water and exclaimed how full he was. He watched Sarah enjoy their dinner and advised her not to force herself to eat everything. It was okay to leave leftovers. Sarah claimed she was just too hungry and hadn't tasted the food properly yet. However, now she could focus on savoring the flavors better and insisted she wouldn't stop anytime soon. She planned to eat everything, but Jin doubted it and wondered where Sarah was putting all the food. He even jokingly wondered if Sarah was using magic. Another morning arrived and Sarah washed her face before putting on the hair clips Keiho had given her. She marveled at the useful things Earth had. Suddenly, she spotted something new, a digital weighing scale. Jin was enjoying pickled vegetables when Sarah interrupted her, curious about the mysterious tool. Wondering if it was some kind of magical device, Sarah asked Jin for an explanation. Jin instructed her to step onto the scale to understand how it worked. As Sarah observed the numbers, Jin revealed that it displayed her weight. Sarah panicked and playfully scolded Jin, accusing her of crossing a line since she was still unmarried. After a brief apology, Jin narrowly avoided Sarah's wrath, who jokingly threatened him. Sarah dubbed the weighing scale a wicked tool, but Jin insisted it was for monitoring one's health. Jin had a realization and asked Sarah if she noticed any changes since she arrived on Earth. Sarah, realizing something herself, was hesitant but eventually admitted that she had gained weight. An awkward silence followed. Jin, Minori, and Kaito were blamed for the delicious food and sweets they provided. Jin acknowledged that they all contributed to Sarah's happiness through food, but suggested reducing her intake. He proposed skipping candy and preparing smaller meals. Sarah, torn between enjoying tasty food and wanting to lose weight, cried at the thought of giving up delicious things. Jin then suggested exercise, but Sarah assumed it would involve sword training, which Jin rejected due to legal and privacy concerns. Jin, however, came up with an idea. He remembered a private property he owned in the mountains, offering Sarah a chance to swing her sword freely. After a drive, they reached the mountain, and Sarah in her armor was excited to find ample space for training. She was uncertain if the place truly belonged to Jin, but was ready to make the most of it. Sarah had wondered whether Jin used to be an aristocrat because he owned a mountain. Jin had insisted it was common for people to own a piece of land or two. He surprised Sarah by asserting that the general area around was all his. According to him, there shouldn't be any issue with Sarah practicing her sword skills there. Sarah started to look excited while holding her sword, and Jin encouraged her to continue. Jin playfully compared Sarah to a dog eagerly awaiting its master's orders. He questioned whether wearing armor was necessary, and Sarah argued that it improved her training results. She unsheathed her sword and her demeanor shifted. This surprised Jin, as it revealed another side to Sarah's range of expressions since she arrived on Earth. Despite this, Sarah found comfort in wielding her sword. Sarah suddenly felt self-conscious under Jin's gaze and wondered if he would only watch her. Jin apologized for staring, explaining that he was simply curious to see a real knight's sword skills. He offered to leave, but Sarah insisted that he stay, admitting she was just a bit shy in her knight mode. Jin decided to leave, but Sarah stopped him, wanting him to stay and witness her practice. The two fell silent again, and Sarah took a deep breath. Her face became serious, and she gracefully swung her sword. Jin was surprised to see her handle the heavy weapon with ease, realizing she must have trained hard as a knight. He felt like her entire life was contained in that sword. Jin was happy to see Sarah cheerful and encouraged her to continue until she was satisfied. Later, Sarah tapped on the car window to wake up Jin. She thanked him for the chance to swing her sword. Jin thought it was worth taking her to the mountains when he saw the satisfaction on her face. Sarah then went to the passenger seat, putting on her seatbelt. Her sweaty, transparent shirt and bra were visible. Sarah apologized for taking too long. Jin, not knowing where to look, suggested she wear the jersey they brought. Sarah insisted she just finished training and didn't want a hot jersey. She then realized her shirt was see-through and her flustered side emerged, breaking the dignified image she had moments ago. The couple returned home and Jin started preparing dinner. He wanted to finish everything before Sarah finished her bath. Sarah felt sad for not helping in the kitchen, but she needed to take a bath. Jin then realized how lonely it was to cook without Sarah around, as he had grown accustomed to her presence. Realizing that he was alone cooking after a long time, Jin suddenly felt liberated. He, being the antisocial person he is, proceeded to cook dinner and decided to make some Italian-style noodles. Things went much smoother compared to the times with Sarah. Sarah used to mess things up like mixing up salt with sugar or attempting to boil eggs in the microwave. It was basically a war zone when she was in the kitchen. Those times were really chaotic with Sarah around. However, Jin suddenly felt lonely and he quickly snapped himself out of it. He continued cooking but noticed that the salt was missing. When he tried to call for Sarah, she was nowhere to be found. Jin suddenly felt embarrassed and realized that he had taken Sarah for granted. Suddenly, Sarah came over after taking a bath. Jin, with his usual stone face, told Sarah that everything was done. Sarah then helped him bring the food to the table and was surprised to see a fried tomato salad layered with cheese. Jin explained what it was. Sarah claimed she got hungry after her bath and offered to set the table, promising not to break any plates anymore. Jin couldn't help but laugh. Food had been served, and Sarah's eyes widened with surprise. Jin informed her that it was an Italian-style cold noodle dish. Initially, Sarah thought it was summon, but Jin clarified that it was different. Sarah noticed it was thicker, and Jin explained that summon noodles were thinner but of higher quality. She remembered how Jin and Kaito didn't treat summon noodles as precious, despite their cost. Jin told her to forget about it, and they began their dinner. Sarah took a bite of the pasta, worked up a sweat, and then enjoyed a relaxing bath. The delicious food satisfied her, and she was delighted with Jin's cooking. Jin smiled, noticing that Sarah was improving with her chopstick skills. She asked for seconds, but Jin reminded her about her weight and insisted he didn't cook a lot. Sarah started to cry and slowly became depressed. Eventually, she decided to stick to just eating the fried tomato salad. Seeing her sadness, Jin stood up and claimed that something was missing. He told Sarah that they would boil noodles again from the start. Sarah happily joined Jin in the kitchen. A few days later, Sarah had gained weight. Jin worked on the farm, pulling out weeds in the greenhouse. Checking on Sarah, who was working hard in a world that wasn't hers, Jin heard some chattering outside. 3 girls he knew well were trying to surprise him, but Jin had already spotted them. Meguru complained about Jin appearing out of nowhere, but Jin found it amusing, considering Meguru's tendency to do the same. Jin couldn't believe the 3 girls were at his place. Meguru claimed they just wanted to hang out, but Jin insisted they should go home. The girls protested, so Kotori stepped in, telling them they were bothering Jin's work. Jin was relieved that Kotori, the eldest, had better sense. However, Kotori suddenly turned pale. Meguru explained that Kotori was the eldest, and Jin, comparing the two, declared that Kotori seemed bigger and more mature. This made Kotori, who had a complex about her size, feel dizzy. Alice blamed Jin for lacking delicacy. Meguru complained that Jin didn't even know their names. Shocked, the girls couldn't believe it since they had known Jin since they were small. Jin admitted he only waved at them and never bothered to learn their names. Kotori went into shock again, and Meguru and Alice continued protesting to Jin. Suddenly, Sarah emerged due to the commotion, recalling the names of the 3 girls. They explained they came to hang out, and Sarah was pleased to see them. The 3 girls were amazed and concluded that Jin wasn't worthy of Sarah. Confused, Sarah asked Jin what happened, and he confessed he didn't know the girls' names. Sarah was surprised, having met them at the candy store earlier. Jin insisted it was only an hour, but Sarah argued that it was normal to remember names, unlike someone asocial like Jin. Alice sensed a lover's quarrel between them. Meguru decided to formally introduce herself, but Jin interrupted her. Kotori went next, and Jin couldn't believe she was younger than Meguru. Alice, being half foreigner, introduced herself and explained her silver hair. Jin referred to them by their family names, Meguru protested, but Jin insisted on not using their first names. Meguru invited Sarah to play, but she declined, still working. Meguru cried and asked Jin to do something. Realizing Sarah had been working since arriving on Earth, Jin decided to weed the garden himself. As he tried to get Sarah to leave, Meguru offered to help weed to finish the work faster. Afterward, Sarah agreed to hang out with them. Jin smiled and asked the girls for their assistance. Sarah questioned if it was okay, and Jin told the girls to do their best. It didn't take them long to finish weeding, and the greenhouse became clean. Sarah expressed her gratitude to the girls for their help. Jin just smiled at them. Sarah then thanked Jin for letting her hang out with the girls. She asked Jin for more work later, but he reassured her, emphasizing the importance of making friends. Sarah was touched. The girls playfully protested that Jin was only nice to his wife. Jin then wondered about the girls' plans. Meguru reminded him that they were deep in the countryside with not much to do. Kotori asked Sarah if she wanted to do something. Sarah, being new to the area, expressed her interest in knowing some places to visit. She asked the girls to guide her to their favorite spots. Touched by her request, the girls happily agreed and told Sarah to follow them. Meguru had announced that they would go first to her favorite place. Alice told her to save it for last since it was far. Meguru was shocked that Alice knew, and Jin realized that the girls might have messed up their introductions in age and grade level. Alice then grabbed Sarah's hand and guided them to her favorite spot. The group walked past the fields and later arrived at the nearby canals. Alice claimed it was her favorite spot, making everyone confused. Sarah wondered what Alice liked about the canals. Alice then pointed out that there were crayfish, snails, and fishes in the water. Sarah was shocked to see small animals living there. Meguru was surprised to see a lot of species. Alice claimed it was fun watching them. Sarah thanked Alice for showing her such a place. Alice claimed watching the flowing water helped her calm down. Jin only knew elderly people saying those words. He could see the other girls were not fit for it. Jin then noticed a frog, and Sarah freaked out a bit. Kotori was the next to guide them around, and Jin started to wonder why they were in the residential area. Soon Kotori discovered something interesting. A group of cats lounging near a bench. Sarah was taken aback. Kotori explained that these cats gathered there and seemed quite clever. Jin noticed Sarah behind him and pondered if she had issues with cats. Similar to her aversion to frogs, Sarah trembled, curious about these bundles of cuteness. A cat brushed against her leg and Kotori assured her that they were friendly, suggesting she try petting them. Sarah hesitantly stroked a nearby cat and blushed a bit. Jin clarified that these creatures were called cats, and they lived with humans as pets. Seeing Sarah overwhelmed by their adorableness, Jin wondered if such creatures didn't exist in her world. Sarah insisted there were no cute animals in her home realm. Suddenly, a cat gazed cutely at Sarah, and it seemed to land a critical hit on her. She then remembered that cats could be kept as pets, but Jin promptly dismissed the idea. Sarah argued that she hadn't said anything yet, but Jin insisted he already knew what she was going to suggest, explaining that raising a cat could be costly. Out of the blue, the cats stood surrounding Jin. The girls were puzzled, wondering if Jin emitted some kind of pheromone or charm that attracted cats. It had been a while since they entered the cat's territory, and Sarah struggled to leave. She eventually bought some drinks and apologized for staying with the cats for an hour. The girls were okay with it since it was Sarah's first time meeting cats. Meguru then suggested they enjoy the drinks in her favorite spot. The group soon arrived at a nearby woods where Meguru revealed her secret base. Inside, it resembled a normal living room with scattered toys. Sarah was curious about what a secret base meant. Meguru jokingly acted like it was a hideout from bad guys, and Sarah almost believed it until Jin clarified. Jin couldn't believe Meguru intended to bring them into the secret base. Kotori wondered if Jin knew about the place, and he explained that it was smaller when he and Kaito used to play there. The girls realized the secret base was well kept over time because of their predecessors. Sarah asked for an explanation, and Jin clarified that a secret base was a place for kids to escape the watchful eyes of adults. It was passed down from one generation to the next, and kids were responsible for bringing things to play with and creating their own hidden space. Sarah was enlightened and wondered if the place was essentially filled with everyone's memories. Suddenly, Sarah noticed something and started giggling. She found some writing on the wall that exclaimed that Jin and Kaito would defeat the foes of evil. Jin tried to destroy it, but Sarah stopped her, claiming that such dark history should be buried. Sarah then noticed some wooden sticks and wondered what their use was. Meguru explained that they used them as pretend swords and clashed together. Sarah got interested. The girls just realized that Sarah was carrying a sword around and wondered if she was great with it. Sarah claimed she spent a lot of time on it. Jin noticed how Sarah low-key flexed herself. Meguru then suggested showing some moves. Sarah seriously claimed that she could not unsheath her sword on a whim. The girls found Sarah cool all of a sudden. Hearing the girls getting excited over swords, Jin gave up and just let them be. They went outside and Sarah faced off with Meguru in swordstick fighting. Sarah asked Meguru to start, but Meguru felt pressure from Sarah. Thinking it was just overthinking, Meguru charged forward to attack. Sarah calmly flicked her hand and disarmed Meguru, leaving her surprised. Jin got a headache as he saw Sarah flip her switch. Sarah remembered the times she trained new recruits and decided to challenge the three girls to attack her simultaneously. Tired of it, Jin just watched the girls sword fight with a blank face. In the end, the girls couldn't land any attacks on Sarah, and she turned into a drill sergeant. Sarah then approached Jin and told him he was the only one left. Jin didn't have a choice and joined, but he was easily defeated. Another day dawned for the fake couple, and the weather proved hotter than usual. Sarah monopolized the electric fan, but even that couldn't beat the relentless heat. Jin observed the fan's defeat by the scorching weather and pondered whether turning on the air conditioner would provide relief. Yet, he hesitated, realizing he hadn't cleaned it yet. With the impending fieldwork in the afternoon, the risk of heatstroke loomed. Jin, struck by an idea, declared it was time to unveil a secret weapon, leaving Sarah puzzled. Jin retrieved an ice shaver, some ice, and syrups. Sarah's eyes lit up with sudden interest. Jin clarified that it was a tool for making shaved ice, a delightful summer treat. He explained the process involving crushing ice and adding syrup. Observing Sarah's enthusiastic reaction to the concept of ice, Jin wondered if they didn't have it in her world. Sarah asserted that ice could only be created in frigid areas or by mages. Sarah had been curious about how the tool worked. Jin explained it to her with simple instructions and a demonstration. He then instructed Sarah to turn the handle. Nervously, she touched the handle and slowly turned it. The ice started making crunching sounds, and Sarah noticed it getting crushed cleanly. Jin told her to keep going until the bowl was filled. Sarah found the ice shaving process enjoyable, and Jin was pleased. After Sarah filled her bowl, it was Jin's turn. Observing Jin struggling, Sarah commented that he was slow and couldn't keep up with her in manual labor in the fields. Embarrassed, Jin wondered why Sarah brought it up. She then recalled how Jin had praised her otherworldly strength, but she explained that it was only used for war and bloodshed to protect lives. On Earth, she noticed that people used their abilities to make life easy and convenient. She believed that Earth was a wonderful place filled with happiness. Jin was surprised and admitted that Sarah might be right. They had just finished their shave ice, and the couple headed to the porch. They enjoyed the scenery in front of them, giving thanks for their food as usual. Sarah began scooping the shaved ice and was surprised by its coldness and sweetness. She claimed she could eat 10 bowls and started devouring the shaved ice until her head ached. Worried, she wondered if she would die, and Jin jokingly told her she had only 3 hours at most. Seeing Sarah panic, Jin clarified that he was just kidding and explained how brain freeze works, blaming it on Sarah's gluttony. As Sarah playfully tried to punch Jin, a cool breeze suddenly came, and she remarked on how it had gotten cooler. Jin stared blankly at Sarah as the female knight noticed something on Jin's mouth. He claimed it was the color from the syrup. Sarah stuck out her tongue, wondering if hers also changed colors. It was a critical hit for Jin, and Sarah noticed how he turned red. Jin blamed it on the heat. Suddenly, 3 girls approached. Sarah was glad to see them, but Jin's moment of peace was over, and he decided to leave them with Sarah. Offering to make some shaved ice, Jin refused Sarah's help and left her with the girls, pleased to see her socializing. Soon after, the girls had returned to Jin's house with some school-related items. After enjoying shaved ice with syrup, Sarah and the girls playfully stuck out their tongues. Meguru suggested that Jin join them, but he complained about the girls hanging out at his house every day. Meguru voiced her concerns about her parents nagging her to study and do chores. Jin threatened to nag them too if they didn't work on their school homework. Meguru argued that it was vacation and she wanted to be with Sarah. Jin acknowledged that Sarah drew attention and things had been noisy lately. Despite empathizing with homework, Jin worried when he learned Meguru hadn't started hers yet. He advised her to follow Kotori's example, but Kotori confessed to being in the same boat, barely having done any homework. Meguru proudly stated that both of them liked to finish homework at the last minute. Jin wondered if Alice was the same, but to everyone's surprise, the elementary schooler claimed to have already finished hers. While her friends called her a traitor, Jin found Alice incredible and was granted permission to pat her head. Sarah smiled at the scene. Meguru decided to take action, piquing Sarah's curiosity about their homework. The girls explained the various tasks for each subject, including an astronomical observation for science class. Since Sarah was unfamiliar with it, Jin explained that it involved observing the movement of stars in the night sky using telescopes. Sarah was amazed by the idea and was invited to join them later. As the girls planned, Jin reminded them about getting permission from their parents to go to the mountains, as the observation required an unobstructed view. The atmosphere turned serious as the girls realized their parents might say no. Sarah, feeling confident, asserted that she could act as their guardian. However, Jin reminded her that the girls' parents didn't know her yet. A heavy silence enveloped everyone. Meguru then proposed having another responsible adult instead of their parents. The girls turned to Jin and Sarah, asking them to join. Jin, anticipating this, agreed and decided to bring Kaito along. However, he advised them to first seek their parents' approval. The girls went home, got the necessary approvals, and returned. Kaito later arrived in his car. He drove them to a viewing platform he and Jin had visited before. Sarah expressed her excitement, and Jin couldn't help but smile. They reached the platform, and the girls marveled at the clear night sky. Sarah looked up at the night sky, marveling at its beauty. She couldn't help but express how amazing the sight was. The girls joined in, noting how clear it appeared without any artificial lights nearby. Jin then reminded them about their homework. Attempting to spot constellations, the girls consulted a star map but were unsure where to look, so they turned to Jin for help. Kaito chuckled and offered assistance, setting up a telescope his father used for hobbies. He focused it on the moon and encouraged Sarah to take a look. Amazed by the moon's clear surface, Sarah was captivated. As the girls continued struggling with the telescope, Kaito offered to handle it. Jin was left alone with Sarah, who remained fascinated by the telescope's view. Jin pondered if it was genuinely astonishing for her. Sarah expressed that she never realized how beautiful Earth's moon could be and found the telescope fascinating. Encouraging Jin to try it, he wondered if Sarah's world also had moons and stars. Sarah explained they had multiple moons with no names, and Jin found it absurd. Sarah sighed, acknowledging Earth's beautiful night sky and reminiscing about watching it with her comrades in the past. She wondered if the Earth's night sky was connected to her homeworld. Jin, concerned since Sarah rarely spoke about her homeworld, wondered if she wanted to go back, feeling a pang of sadness at the thought of her leaving. Despite finding human relationships troublesome, he realized he had adapted to Sarah being part of his life. Catching Jin staring at her, Sarah blushed intensely. Suddenly, Meguru appeared, urging them to eat snacks, oblivious to the tension. Jin inquired about their homework, and Meguru assured him it was done. Everyone enjoyed snacks together, gazing at the night sky. The group had driven back home, making a stop to drop off Jin and Sarah in between. Jin asked Kaito to take the kids home as it was getting late. The girls felt sad saying goodbye to Sarah. Kaito then reminded Jin about the upcoming summer festival and invited him to join as a group. Excitedly, he mentioned there would be fireworks. Sarah, curious about it, expressed her interest, and Kaito happily invited her. Jin noticed Sarah's eagerness and reminded Kaito that he wasn't comfortable with crowds. Despite that, Kaito wanted to hang out like old times. Jin seemed conflicted, and Kaito commented on how people change after marriage. Jin asked them to leave, and Kaito drove away. Jin and Sarah began walking back home. Sarah noticed the flashlight was dimmer, worrying she had broken it. Jin explained it had just run out of battery, clarifying that batteries produce energy for the light. Jin decided to use his phone's flashlight. Though it was weak, it was better than nothing for their 10-minute walk. Sarah then suggested using magic to create light. Jin was surprised and skeptical, wondering if it was possible. Sarah claimed she could generate more light than the flashlight. Jin hesitantly agreed, acknowledging the danger of the dark path. He told Sarah to give it a try. Sarah began to glow, reciting some words. Jin's eyes widened as he saw Sarah creating light magic with her hands. Within moments, orbs of bright light scattered around them. The entire area suddenly lit up, leaving Jin deeply amazed. Sarah mentioned that she converted the mana in the surroundings into light, happy to see Jin's face clearly. Jin had to acknowledge once again that Sarah was from another world. Curious, Jin wondered if the light was hot to touch. Sarah assured him it wasn't and suggested holding it. Jin hesitated, but Sarah took his hands, making it seem like Jin was controlling the light even though she was still in control. All of a sudden, Sarah felt a jolt as she realized she was holding Jin's hands. She tried to say sorry, but Jin quickly grabbed her arm and pulled her towards a tree. Feeling anxious, Sarah wondered what Jin had in mind. Before she could ask, Jin informed her that someone was nearby. It turned out to be Shigeru, out for a night walk. He froze when he noticed the scattered balls of light disappearing, fearing they were will-o-wisps. Jin was relieved that Shigeru had spotted them, and at that moment, a flustered Sarah pointed out that Jin's hand was tightly gripping hers. Embarrassed, Jin apologized, explaining he was trying to conceal her magic. Sarah, though surprised when Jin pulled her towards the tree, understood it was to avoid being seen by Shigeru. Feeling a bit awkward, Jin thought he might have acted inappropriately. Suddenly, they overheard Shigeru telling Minori about the will-o-wisps, but Minori dismissed it as imagination. Jin and Sarah decided to leave the area. Later on, Shigeru shared his experience with the neighbors, and Kaho mentioned the old man was now too scared to take the same road. Wondering why Kaho showed up, she explained she came for Sarah, having heard about their summer festival plans. According to Kaho, it wouldn't be complete without something specific for Sarah. When the summer festival arrived, there were numerous food stalls, and a blonde person in a kimono strolled through the streets. Meguri, Kotori, and Alice had arrived while Kaito ushered them in. They were curious if Jin and Sarah were running late. Just then, they overheard people talking about someone resembling a model. It turned out to be Sarah, who had just arrived. Spotting the group, she excitedly approached, but accidentally tripped. Jin was quick to support her, reminding her to be careful. Sarah mentioned she wasn't used to wearing geta, and the girls complimented her on how great she looked in a yukata. Sarah admitted it was her first time wearing one and felt nervous. Jin smiled, while Kaito, with a mischievous tone, commented on how lucky Jin was to have such a wife. Jin assured Kaito he'd find his partner soon, but Kaito wasn't fond of Jin's attitude. Kaito then mentioned hearing something from Keiho. According to Kaho, Jin was shocked and just stared at Sarah when she tried on the yukata. Kaito continued teasing Jin, and Jin blamed Kaho for it. Kaito decided it was time for him to find a girlfriend. Jin gazed at Sarah, who was enjoying the festivities. He agreed that she looked pretty, and confessed that it was impossible not to have certain thoughts when looking at her. Sarah, in turn, blushed while looking at Kaito. Meguri then surprised her and encouraged her to enjoy the festival by visiting the stalls. With the internet research she did with Jin's help, Sarah decided to try everything. Jin wondered how much Sarah would eat. Kaito laughed, reminding them to make the most of the festival since it only happened once a year. Jin smiled and agreed. The group explored the festival, and Sarah was amazed by the lively atmosphere. Meguru then informed Sarah that she had located the food stalls they were looking for. Excitement filled the air as the girls discussed what to eat. Jin noticed Alice standing nearby and thought he seemed lonely. She decided to join him in line, finding him kind. Alice expressed that she was already enjoying the festival with everyone, giving credit to Jin. Although Jin wondered why she felt that way because of him, the girls called them over to join for food. Jin remembered Kaito's and Alice's words, smiled, and acknowledged that it was all thanks to Sarah. He felt grateful and expressed that he should be the one thanking them. The festivities went on, and Sarah had a great time trying some yakisoba. She found it tasty, and the girls all agreed that festival food was way better than what they usually had at home. As they walked around, Sarah noticed families and friends enjoying the festival. It felt like there was something special about the atmosphere. Hungry for more, Sarah decided to get more food. As they strolled, Sarah spotted something interesting. She told Jin she wanted to try it out. They ended up sitting in front of a fish scooping stall. Sarah was curious if the fish were meant to be eaten, but Jin explained they were ornamental or could be kept as pets. Sarah wondered if it was similar to what aristocrats did for fun. Jin explained the tradition and introduced her to the paper scoop. Sarah doubted its effectiveness, but Jin decided to show her. He skillfully scooped a fish out of the water and into a bowl. Sarah was amazed and wanted to know his secret. Jin shared that it was a pastime he enjoyed when he was younger during festivals. Getting serious, Sarah asked Jin to teach her how to do it. He warned her that it might be tough for a first-timer. But the shopkeeper also offered instructions since he found Sarah interesting. While Jin silently watched, he was glad to see Sarah having fun as always. After Jin gave her some instructions, Sarah decided to go for it and became serious. She felt determined. The shopkeeper sensed a change in her attitude. Sarah found the right moment and went for the scoop. However, the water splashed and Jin ended up getting wet. The paper scoop broke and Sarah couldn't believe it. She apologized for causing trouble and felt disappointed for failing despite the instructions. Jin reminded Sarah that it was her first time playing the game and that she could try again next year. Sarah was surprised to hear the words, "next year." Jin received a message from Kaito and decided to regroup with the others. He told Sarah to hold onto his sleeves to avoid getting lost. Sarah silently held onto his sleeves and followed him. She had lost her composure earlier when Jin mentioned the future. She wondered if Jin meant it and if she would still be on Earth next year. Sarah found Jin kind and nice to others. When she realized that Jin was just being friendly, she got disappointed and stopped holding onto his sleeves. As her heart thumped, a loud sound surprised her. The fireworks had started and she wondered what it was. Overhearing people talking about the fireworks show, the crowd rushed toward a certain location. Feeling confused, Sarah was grabbed by Jin, who said they had to change plans. Jin then dragged Sarah by her hand and she suddenly felt embarrassed again. While Sarah was flustered, Jin tried to figure out Kaito's location from his message. Sarah glanced around and was surprised to see a crowd gathering and walking in a certain direction. She wondered why Jin was leading her down a different path. Jin explained that they were headed somewhere unknown to the others. Eventually, they stumbled upon a small staircase and ascended it. Curious, Sarah asked about the fireworks everyone was talking about. Jin then described how fireworks were made from a combination of gunpowder and metal, formed into balls, and shot into the sky to explode into colorful shapes. Sarah pondered if it was similar to the entertainment in her world, where they shot fire magic into the sky. Jin, intrigued, asked how that worked. Sarah explained that in her world, they mobilized the kingdom's army of mages to shoot fireballs into the sky one after another, creating a succession of explosions. She excitedly mentioned that the most impressive display involved casting a large-scale spell to create a moving dragon. Jin found the other world's fireworks display both crazy and impressive. Shortly after, the two finally reached the end of the staircase and discovered a cozy spot with benches, perfect for enjoying the fireworks. Kaito and the girls greeted them warmly. Jin grumbled about how Kaito hadn't just told him the location directly, but instead gave him a riddle to solve. Kaito then pondered if they were intruding, and assumed that the two who had been holding hands the whole time would prefer to be alone together. Jin and Sarah suddenly realized that their hands were still stuck together like magnets. Sarah attempted to explain, but Jin advised her to give up since Kaito wouldn't listen. Meguru then informed them that the fireworks display had begun. Sarah looked up at the night sky and marveled at the exploding fireworks. It was her first time witnessing such a spectacle and she was thoroughly impressed. Everyone else also watched in awe as the fireworks lit up the sky. The display featured a variety of shapes, sizes, and colors, leaving Sarah wide-eyed and open-mouthed at the incredible sight. She turned to Jin, expressing how amazing the fireworks looked and admiring their different shapes and colors. She also pondered aloud how the fireworks could produce such vibrant hues. Upon hearing Sera's questions, Kotori also found herself wondering the same thing. Jin explained that using different metals with various thermal reactions created distinct colors. He went on to say that sodium produced yellow flames, while potassium produced purple ones. Alice then suggested it had to do with how the flames reacted, and Jin was pleased that the youngest understood. He couldn't believe Kotori and Meguru were being outdone by an elementary schooler. While Kotori felt hurt by the comparison, Meguru seemed indifferent, as if she didn't care. As they watched the fireworks display, Sera expressed her amazement at how people manipulated flame colors using metal reactions. She marveled at Earth's abundant and wonderful technology. Jin mentioned he also wanted to see the flame dragon Sera had mentioned earlier. Sera's expression suddenly changed upon hearing this. She hoped to show Jin around their royal capital when the opportunity arose. Jin suddenly realized what he had just said. He looked down while Sera continued watching the fireworks. He realized that it had been a month since Sera had arrived on Earth. He noticed how Sera was starting to remember her previous world more often. Jin had also started thinking about Sera's feelings about being on Earth. He wondered if Sera liked her current lifestyle or if she wanted to go home. He couldn't tell anything from Sera's expression alone. Soon after, the fireworks display ended. While other people were still walking around the stalls, Jin and the others rode the train back home. Suddenly, Jin noticed Sera giggling. Sera said there was always a strange melancholic feeling right after a festival ended. Jin said it was because the loudest ones were sleeping, which made Sera laugh. The train rattled as it journeyed back home. Jin thought about the times he had spent with Sera. He asked her if she would return to her previous world if she could. Sera stayed silent, and only the train's noises filled the air. Jin waited for her response, but since she didn't say anything, he tried asking again. Suddenly, Sera leaned her head on Jin's shoulder and fell asleep. Jin couldn't believe she had nodded off at that moment, wearing a goofy expression. She was already dreaming about eating a lot of food. Watching her, Jin realized that his worries were just creations of his own imagination. As everyone stepped off the train, they had a blast. Kaito told Jin and Sera to head home while he looked after the kids. Jin asked if Kaito was sure, and Kaito assured him he was used to it. Jin thanked Kaito for inviting them, which caught Kaito off guard. He grinned and teased Jin for being so sincere in his thanks. The group split up shortly after, with Jin and Sera heading home together. Sera was thrilled about experiencing an Earth festival and remarked on how tasty the food was. Jin was happy Sera enjoyed herself but was surprised by how much she could eat. Sera admitted she was disappointed with her performance in the shooting and goldfish scooping games. Suddenly her geta snapped, causing Sera to trip to the ground. Jin rushed to check on her. Sera apologized, explaining that her geta had broken. Her ankle was visibly injured, and Jin wondered if she could manage. Sera insisted she was okay, but Jin was concerned because her ankle looked swollen. Despite the swelling, Sera attempted to stand up to show she was fine, but she was overcome by a sudden sharp pain and let out a groan. Feeling embarrassed for trying to appear strong, she fell silent and looked away. Jin turned his back to Sera and suggested she hop on as he would carry her. Sera protested, saying she didn't want to burden Jin. Jin reassured her and used a metaphor, likening her to an injured soldier and himself to a comrade supporting her. Sera's eyes widened as she pictured the scenario and exclaimed that it embodied the spirit of camaraderie among soldiers. Jin simply let Sera imagine whatever made sense to her. He urged her to hurry and get on, and Sera expressed her gratitude. Jin couldn't believe how quickly Sera grasped the concept by relating it to the perspective of a knight. The two walked back home, passing through fields and streams. They didn't speak much at first. Sera had her arms around Jin as he carried her. Suddenly, a wave of sadness washed over her as she realized she always seemed to cause trouble for Jin. Even though she had insisted she'd be okay, she knew her leg would take 2 to 3 days to heal. They had work the next day, but Jin insisted she rest for the day. Feeling guilty, Sera remembered how dependable Jin always was. Wanting to express her gratitude, she struggled to find the right words, making Jin wonder if she was uncomfortable. Sera then admitted she felt she was always on the receiving end and promised to return the favor someday. She asked Jin if he had any desires, to which he quickly replied that he didn't. The conversation grew awkward, but Jin reassured her not to dwell on it and to let him know if her injury worsened. Sera then opened up about her upbringing in a family of knights, where she was taught to protect others from a young age. For her, knights existed to protect, not to be protected, and that was the belief she lived by. She confessed that she was unsure how to handle receiving so much help from Jin. Jin wasn't expecting such a confession, and it made him realize that Sera's beliefs were different from those of a modern man. He sighed and reassured Sera that it wasn't a big deal. He reminded her that since she had come to Earth, her life had been far from that of a knight's, so it was normal for her to feel lost or confused sometimes. Jin understood that Sera's life had suddenly changed drastically, and he was impressed that she could still live and smile through it all. He advised her not to worry too much and just accept things as they were. He admitted that from his perspective, Sarah was just a normal girl, which made her blush. Jin then suggested that Sarah take her time to figure out who she was. There was no need to rush. He offered to accompany her on this journey. Sarah had a moment of realization as she thanked Jin. She found Jin to be exceedingly kind. She blushed as she felt her heart flutter. Despite not having anything to offer in return, she felt obliged to accept Jin's kindness. She was willing to do anything for his sake, even though Jin was content with receiving nothing. Then she wondered whether she was heavy. Jin attempted to reassure her, but ultimately agreed. Sarah fell into silence, and Jin began to cry out in pain as Sarah held onto him tightly. 4 days later, in the middle of a hot, sunny day, a familiar-looking blonde girl was weeding the fields and collected a lot of weeds. Jin stared at her blankly and wondered if Sarah should have been working already. He had reminded her how swollen her leg had been days ago and asked her not to push herself too much. Sarah insisted that she had already fully recovered as she focused mana into her leg to boost the recovery speed. Jin did believe it since he had seen that morning how the swelling had gone down when Sarah asked him for work. He realized Sarah was not the type to laze around and would prefer to do something rather than nothing. Suddenly he recalled how Sarah had insisted that she would pay back Jin by fulfilling his desires. Jin glanced over at Sarah, who was clumsily weeding, and sighed. He called her out and reminded her not to overwork, especially since she was still recovering. He asked her to promise not to push herself too hard, threatening that he wouldn't let her work anymore if she didn't. Sarah's face flushed with Jin's sudden genuine concern. Jin urged her to take it easy and head back to the house instead. Flustered, Sarah promised to do so. Jin was relieved and got up to go somewhere. Sarah watched him go and clenched her fist. Jin complained about how hot August was. Sarah wondered if they were going to pick tomatoes, surprising Jin with her knowledge. Jin explained that another batch of tomatoes had ripened. Sarah was amazed to see the produce and felt a sudden swell of pride seeing them grow so big. She expressed her feelings using a Japanese phrase about parting and reuniting. Jin wondered where Sarah had even learned such a phrase. Sarah claimed it was from TV, reminding Jin that she had been glued to it during her recovery. Jin remembered that Sarah had been stuck with the TV the whole time she was recovering. He told her they would pick the tomatoes just like before. Sarah was excited about picking tomatoes, especially the fully red ones she could eat right away. Jin was worried for some reason. They began picking tomatoes and Sarah quickly found one that was ready to eat. Jin scolded her for carrying too many boxes and the two finished their harvest together. Jin had loaded the harvest into his truck to deliver it. He had told Sarah to stay home and rest, but Sarah had insisted on working more. She had promised not to push herself too hard and had insisted on pulling out more weeds in another field. Jin had sighed, realizing that Sarah was not a child and should know how to take care of her body. He had agreed but had given Sarah only 15 minutes since it was hot outside. Sarah had been glad and had promised to ensure that all the weeds would be removed by the time Jin returned. Jin had glared at her, and Sarah had sworn to stick to just 15 minutes. Jin had asked her to keep that promise, and Sarah had nodded. Sarah watched as Jin drove away in his truck, then turned her attention to the field. Memories flooded back of Jin carrying her and sharing his concerns while she was recovering. She felt frustrated that she couldn't repay his kindness. Despite her being on the mend, Jin had juggled the farm work and still cared for her. It dawned on her that Jin was genuinely compassionate. Determined to contribute, Sarah began weeding, resolving to assist Jin with tasks like tending to the fields. Her expression showed a readiness to pull out every single weed in sight. Shortly after, the sun kept beating down on the fields and we observed Sarah sweating profusely next to the bags of weeds. She gasped for air, her face turning red from the heat. When she attempted to announce that she had finished, Jin suddenly seized her and peered into her face. Fuming, he yelled at Sarah. Sarah was taken aback by Jin's early return. Jin angrily demanded to know what she was talking about, as it had already been hours. Sarah apologized for losing track of time. She insisted she was okay, explaining that in her previous life, she would endure long marches under the scorching sun while clad in heavy armor. She apologized for breaking her promise but reassured him that she was all right. Jin noticed that Sarah had been sweating excessively. Her breathing was irregular and her face had turned red. He recognized these as signs of heat stroke. Concerned, he urged her to hop into the truck so he could take her somewhere cooler and help her rehydrate. Despite Sarah's protest that she was okay, she suddenly felt something was wrong. Jin turned back to see Sarah looking confused and he moved to support her. But Sarah's legs gave out, causing her to collapse to the ground. Her vision started to blur and she struggled to hear Jin's voice clearly. Her gaze became unfocused and she felt herself slipping away as consciousness faded. Even as she lost awareness, her only thought was to assist Jin. Jin gently lifted Sarah into his arms, taking care to support her as he carried her. When Sarah first arrived on Earth and opened her eyes, she was greeted by the beautiful clear sky. She lay on the paddy field, feeling as still as a doll. The moment she laid eyes on Jin for the first time, she found his black hair and dark eyes extremely attractive. Fast forward to the present, the noise from the TV jolted Sarah awake. She attempted to sit up, but her head throbbed painfully. That's when she realized she had made a mistake. Faintly, she remembered how Jin had taken care of her when she fainted from the extreme heat. She could vividly recall Jin's comforting smile as he nursed her. Sera felt disappointed in herself for inconveniencing Jin once again. Jin had already provided her with a place to stay and work, knowing she couldn't return to her previous world. Whenever Jin spoke about working in the fields, he seemed perpetually in a bad mood. Sera mentally prepared herself for difficult tasks. But to her surprise, Jin was a diligent farmer who approached his work with sincerity. He courteously taught her everything he knew, including cooking, and ensured she received a fair wage for shopping. He also took the time to educate her about Earth's culture. Sera seemed down as she tried thinking of what to do next. She glanced at the white dress she had purchased, hanging on the wall. She pondered how she could thank Jin. Suddenly, she realized the TV had been playing all along, brought by Jin to keep her company. She must have hit the remote in her sleep. As she went to switch it off, something caught her eye. She found herself drawn to whatever was playing on the TV and couldn't look away. That night, Jin had been in the kitchen getting himself a drink. He was worried about Sera collapsing and realized he should have driven her home before delivering the tomatoes. He blamed himself for making her overwork. Walking back to his room, he set an early alarm. However, upon opening the door, he found Sera sitting on his futon. She looked flushed and embarrassed. Jin was surprised and asked if she was okay. It struck him as odd to find her in his room. Nervous, Sera felt her heart racing but steeled herself. Jin was taken aback when Sera suddenly stood up and began removing her clothes. He angrily demanded to know what she was doing, but then he was captivated by her beauty and couldn't speak. Sera approached him and closed the door behind her. They stood there in silence until Sera mentioned she wanted to sleep with him. Jin was taken aback but couldn't find the words as he gazed into Sera's eyes, overwhelmed by the moment. The entire room fell silent, and Jin's gaze locked onto Sera while her words echoed in his mind. He appeared stunned, struggling to understand if she was serious. With a hint of embarrassment, Sera expressed her desire to repay Jin for his kindness, inviting him to share the futon for the night. Jin, taken aback, questioned Sera's awareness of her actions. She insisted she knew exactly what she was doing. Jin was someone who was normally composed, but this time his cheeks flushed with color. As Sera tried to explain further, she accidentally stepped on a stray marker pen, setting the stage for a classic rom-com moment. Losing her footing, Sera tumbled, and Jin swiftly moved to catch her. They both ended up on the floor, with Sera landing on top of Jin, who had managed to break her fall. Jin checked to ensure Sera was uninjured, only to find her determined yet flustered. She declared her willingness to give herself to Jin for his sake, leaving Jin speechless as he gazed at her embarrassed expression. Taking hold of Jin's hand, Sera placed it on her cheek, reaffirming her offer. Jin's heart raced as he observed Sera's fair complexion and rosy cheeks. With a serious expression, Sera leaned in closer to Jin's face, intensifying their proximity. Jin couldn't say anything as he felt Sera's warmth close to him. He gently placed her hand on her back and agreed that there was no need to hold back anymore. However, too bad for our viewers, Sera declared that she would be Jin's body pillow for the night. Jin felt a sudden confusion and observed Sera's embarrassed expression. She then began to guide Jin towards his futon, offering herself as a comforting pillow to help ease Jin's exhaustion. She had promised to be a good body pillow, so Jin playfully tapped her head. Calling her silly, he said he didn't need a body pillow. Sera was surprised because she thought all men enjoyed such things. Jin, with a doubtful look, asked where she got that idea. Sera explained she heard about it on TV during a segment about making men happy. She listened as the guest speaker suggested wearing cute lingerie and getting into bed with them, assuring that the man would surely cuddle their partner. The host was concerned about how direct the advice was. That's what Sera had heard. Jin dismissed the show as trashy. Sera added that when they were shopping for underwear, Kaho suggested buying something she thought Jin would like, which Jin resented. Jin then asked if Sera really understood what was said on the TV show. Sera was initially flustered and assumed that women wearing lingerie while sleeping with men would help them relax after a long day of work. Sera was too innocent for such thoughts, feeling embarrassed to even show her bare skin. At least that was the part that embarrassed her. She continued to insist that she would offer herself to Jin to repay him. Jin had been serious as he asked Sera if she knew what would happen next. He simply stared at her, waiting for an answer. Confusion filled Sera's mind as she wondered if there was something about to unfold. Jin appeared bewildered, his head starting to ache. In response, he tossed a blanket over Sera and instructed her to forget what she had heard from the TV show. With a chuckle, he remarked that Sera was jumping the gun a bit. His smug expression momentarily startled Sera. Jin then advised her not to dwell on it and to go to bed instead. Sera hesitated, expressing her desire to repay Jin since she always felt like she was receiving rather than giving. Witnessing Sera's sadness, Jin confessed that she was mistaken to think she hadn't done anything for him. In fact, he was grateful to her. Sera was too surprised to respond, feeling confused. Jin clarified that Sera's arrival had changed his world. Sera got confused and asked Jin what he meant by that. Jin explained that before he became a farmer, he had worked for a company. He described it as something similar to a guild or a knight's order in Sera's world. He had been busier in a different way compared to farming, but he had enjoyed the job at the same time. However, he tried to cover for a mistake made by one of his trusted subordinates, and the responsibility for the mistake was pushed onto him, leading him to resign. Soon after, he overheard that his subordinate and some colleagues had staged the whole thing together. It was a poor excuse, but that was why Jin stopped trusting other people. When he began his life as a farmer, he told himself to avoid interacting with people as much as possible. He didn't want to trust anyone anymore, so he worked alone until Sera showed up. Sera suddenly felt a sense of wonder while listening to Jin. Jin said he started relying on others again when Sera appeared in his life. He even participated in the festival with the others. He had already decided to live on his own, but he enjoyed the time he spent with everyone. He listed the moments he shared with Sera, doing farm work, cooking, and eating meals together. They even hung out a lot outside. Before he realized it, Jin felt that his life had become brighter. The reason he started to enjoy spending time with others was all thanks to Sera. Jin asked her not to feel like she owed him anything, as he was also thankful to her. Jin's words made Sera cry and touched her deeply. She was glad she could help. Jin then admitted he was worried about Sera's feelings about living with him. He knew Sera had no choice but to stay with him and work on the farm, even though she wanted to return to her previous world as soon as possible. Sera suddenly became flustered. She said she did want to go back home quickly because she was concerned about the people she left behind. However, she had ended up in a world where she knew nothing, and Jin and his neighbors had helped her ease her anxiety. Sera had been raised as a knight, and thanks to Jin, she was able to experience things beyond her knightly duties. She had always felt the duty to become an excellent knight like her father. However, seeing other girls her age enjoying themselves and watching her mother and maids cook made her feel jealous. She said she also wanted to experience those things since all she ever did was swing her sword. Sera didn't know who she was on Earth, but the time she spent there was extremely fulfilling and enjoyable. If it was okay with Jin and the others, Sera would want to stay on Earth because that's how she felt at the moment. After listening to Sera's words, Jin realized that she still had mixed feelings about things. However, he was glad to hear that Sera had been enjoying her time on Earth. Jin looked grim for a moment and told himself that this was enough for them. He then told Sera to keep doing whatever they had been doing so far. For now, he wanted their relationship to stay as it was. With a bright smile, Sera agreed. She suddenly looked down and mentioned that she hadn't managed to return to her homeworld. She paused for a second while looking at Jin. Then she suggested that they get married for real if she couldn't go back home. Jin was too stunned to speak at first, then suddenly shouted out loud in disbelief. He wondered what Sera was talking about. His extreme reaction seemed to hurt Sera a bit, but then Sera laughed and claimed it was a joke. Jin called her an idiot and exclaimed that getting married to a child would lead to divine retribution. Sera insisted that she was a proper adult. Jin argued that those who were still in their teens were basically considered children. This surprised Sera. Suddenly, Sera recalled Jin's question about what would happen next when a woman sleeps next to a man. This made Jin flustered, and he exclaimed that it was something a child like her didn't need to know. He insisted it was nothing important to explain or do anyway. Sera looked confused, while Jin wished she could just forget his question. Sera then smiled and asked Jin to teach her about it once she got a little bit older. Jin suddenly felt his heart flutter. Sera looked confused by his reaction. Jin just smiled and said they would see when the time comes. Sera complained about how Jin was being evasive. Jin then told her to stop the topic and reminded her to get dressed. The next morning, Jin got up early as usual but still felt tired because of what had happened the night before. He started recalling Sera's actions and wondered how he should interact with her now. The event had made Jin sleep less. He sighed, remembering how Sera casually got dressed and returned to her room. He assumed that Sera didn't really understand what she had heard on TV, as she didn't seem flustered. Jin figured he was overthinking things and went to the kitchen. There, he saw Sera preparing breakfast and assumed she was back to normal. Thinking there were no problems, Jin greeted her. Sera looked back and greeted Jin but acted flustered. Jin paused for a moment and realized they were walking on eggshells. He mentioned to Sera how she had seemed fine when heading back to her room last night. Sera then exclaimed that she had realized the issue after having time to think about what she did. Covering her embarrassed face, Sera claimed she would sort things out before the workday started. Jin was dumbfounded but soon smiled. Seeing Sera preparing breakfast alone, Jin offered to help. Sera refused and asked Jin to leave today's breakfast to her, saying she already knew how to use the home appliances and wanted to handle everything herself. Jin was surprised by her sudden determination and asked if she was sure about doing it alone. He said it was fine since it saved him the effort. Jin was worried because it had only been a few hours since the events of the previous night, and he wondered if Sera was still overthinking things and forcing herself to repay the favor. Sera then exclaimed that it wasn't what Jin was thinking. She said she wanted to learn to cook by herself after watching Jin make meals for her. Jin felt his heart flutter and smiled. He agreed, and Sarah told him to wait in the tatami room. Jin was glad that Sarah didn't seem to be pressuring herself and assumed that the awkwardness from the previous night would fade with time. Jin suddenly paused and remembered that the sugar jar was already empty. He turned back, calling out to Sarah, but accidentally bumped into her. Jin apologized, knowing that Sarah was looking for the sugar. Sarah froze for a moment but kept her composure while Jin talked about the sugar up close. However, she couldn't keep her cool, and her face turned red with embarrassment. Flustered, she admitted that she was looking to refill the sugar and asked Jin to let her handle it after he told her where to find more. Jin then teasingly moved closer, making Sarah even more flustered. He smirked, enjoying her embarrassment, and wondered if Sarah would be able to compose herself before the workday started. Sarah claimed she would calm down soon, and complained about Jin teasing her. It was Jin's payback from the night before. Jin then gave her instructions on where to get the sugar. He watched as Sarah, still embarrassed but trying to calm herself, attempted to handle things on her own. Jin just smiled, appreciating her effort, and decided to read the newspaper while waiting for breakfast. It had been a while since Jin had a chance to relax in the morning. However, Sarah suddenly messed up while cracking the eggs. She was deeply shocked and apologized for wasting the egg. Hearing Sarah's commotion, Jin wondered if he could really have a relaxing breakfast that morning. Soon after, Sarah went to the tatami room to bring in breakfast. Jin thanked Sarah for her hard work but noticed she seemed disheartened. Jin thought she looked like she was on death row or something. Sarah then apologized, thinking she could have done a better job. The breakfast she served had burnt egg rolls and fish. This was why Sarah was upset, and Jin stared blankly at his breakfast. Sarah exclaimed that she couldn't let Jin eat the mess she made and suggested eating chazuke instead, a simple Japanese meal made by pouring green tea over cooked rice. Jin insisted he would eat what she made. Worried, Sarah intently watched Jin. He could empathize after seeing the burnt egg roll. He then silently ate a piece of it and moved on to the fish. He ate them quietly without any negative reactions. He then looked at the soup and took a comforting sip. Sarah watched him eat and asked how it tasted. Jin chewed for a while and said it was edible. Sarah was shocked because it wasn't like Jin to not give false compliments by saying it was delicious. However, Jin noticed that the dishes matched his preferences. Sarah said she made the dishes with his tastes in mind. Jin looked at the meal again and smiled. Although Sarah's cooking skills weren't great yet, the care she put into the meal was clear, and Jin enjoyed it. It had been a long time since someone else cooked for Jin. Minutes ago, he watched Sarah put effort into making breakfast. He smiled and commended Sarah for it, and he also thanked her. Sarah was surprised by Jin's sincerity and looked pleased afterward. She said it was heartwarming to receive praise for her cooking. Jin agreed. Sarah then asked for another chance to cook in the future, and Jin didn't hesitate to agree while reminding her not to push herself too hard. Sarah promised to do her best to prepare a better meal next time. Jin knew the breakfast was a bit of a mess, but he realized that living together wasn't too bad. He then told Sarah to eat with him since he was bothered by her watching him eat. Sarah said she wanted to observe to improve next time, but Jin told her to forget about that and eat for now. Afterward, Jin stepped out to do some farm work. It was cooler in the morning, but the heat would increase by midday. At that moment, Sarah excitedly asked if she was wearing the straw hat correctly. Her eyes brightened as she tried it out. She giggled and thanked Jin. Jin wondered why she was so excited about it and explained that it was to protect her head from the sun. He reminded her not to collapse again. Sarah promised to be careful. She was eager to work in the fields again since it had been a while. Jin sighed with a smile and reminded her once more not to collapse. Sarah then complained about the repeated reminder. The fake couple soon went to the fields, and Sarah paused and sat in front of something she saw for the first time. She asked what the black things covering the fields were since they hadn't been there the last time she tended the fields. Jin explained that the covers were to prevent the soil from dehydrating because he had just planted some carrot seeds. Sarah was shocked and fell to the ground. She couldn't believe she missed out on something fun while she was resting. Jin asked if she really wanted to plant carrots so badly. Sarah then explained that she only helped out with the simple tasks and picked the crops that Jin planted. She was sad that she never got the chance to grow something from the start by herself. She wanted to participate in the initial steps of planting a crop if she was given the chance. Jin smiled and was glad to hear Sarah's words. He then announced that they would be planting something to be harvested in winter. Sarah got excited and asked what crop it would be. Jin said it was just potatoes. He explained that they would prepare the soil first by plowing the fields and mixing it with fertilizer so the potatoes would grow easily. Sarah was surprised to learn that growing a single potato involved such advanced techniques. She found the potatoes on Earth sweet and delicious. Jin asked if they had potatoes in her world too. Sarah explained that their potatoes were emergency crops and weren't as large or delicious as the ones on Earth. She also mentioned that most places with wars and monsters tended to have low fertility soil. She felt sad that the same plant could be made so much more delicious. Jin then told her to learn the farming techniques on Earth and teach them what she learned. He explained that if Sarah managed to return to her world, she could use her farming knowledge from Earth to make delicious food there. Sarah wore an expression that showed she realized something important. She felt happy as she imagined everyone on her world smiling. Jin looked pleased and told her it was time to start working. He instructed her that the first step was to plow the soil using a hoe. He reminded Sarah not to do a full swing because it might injure her shoulder. However, Sarah didn't listen and swung the hoe widely. Her swing hit the ground too hard, causing it to crack like a wrecking ball had hit it. Jin was shocked and scolded Sarah for destroying the field. Sarah apologized and embarrassingly explained that she couldn't control her strength sometimes. She promised to do it properly next time. Jin glared at her with concern. He worried that if Sarah taught the people in her world farming, it might lead to destruction. He then told her to pay attention as he demonstrated how to do it. Jin's worries were unnecessary because Sarah quickly learned the right amount of strength needed to till the ground. She asked for confirmation and Jin agreed that it was perfect. He had completely forgotten that Sarah was very athletic. The large field was neatly plowed by Sarah alone, all while she smiled. Sarah wondered what to do next, and Jin explained that they needed to spread and mix the fertilizer next to the plowed ground. He gave her a bucket of fertilizer to spread over a third of the field. While Sarah spread the fertilizer, Jin started preparing the next batch. He was glad to have a helping hand. He then looked at what Sarah was doing. Sarah was sprinkling the fertilizer delicately, like Salt Bay, or rather, Fertilizer Bay. Jin complained that the sun would set before she could finish at that rate. He reminded her that the fertilizer was not salt or pepper and told her to apply the compost a whole bucket at a time. Hearing his instructions, Sarah didn't hesitate to pour everything from the bucket at once. They watched as the bucket emptied in a second. Sarah felt gloomy for messing up again, but Jin told her to just scoop it back up. Jin saw how Sarah quickly mastered plowing but was still slow in picking up other tasks. It was a mystery. Sarah knew Jin was thinking something rude by the way he stared blankly at her. Jin reminded her that they still had 3 more types of fertilizer to apply. Sarah was shocked and promised to do her best. Soon after some tilling, Sarah claimed it was done, seeing that the soil for the potatoes was already prepared. In her mind, Sarah couldn't believe how much work it was to replow the fields every time fertilizer was applied. However, she was glad to know they could now grow large and delicious potatoes. Sarah then suggested they move to the next step, and Jin wondered what she was talking about. Expectantly, Sarah said they should start planting the potatoes. Jin bluntly told her it wasn't time yet since the field still needed to sit for a bit before plowing again, and they needed to repeat the process a few more times. Sarah felt blank and became depressed and shocked. She was sad that it wasn't time to plant yet. Jin apologized for not telling her earlier and said that the first step was all they could do for now. Sarah then realized that she had learned a lot. Planting a single potato required an incredible amount of work. She decided to look forward to the day they could plant the potatoes and plow the fields to grow good potatoes. Jin smiled and reminded her not to collapse from the heat. Sarah said she would be fine because of the straw hat. Jin replied that the straw hat wouldn't be as effective as Sarah thought. Another day came and it was time to harvest some cucumbers. Sarah was surprised to see how much the cucumbers had grown since she last saw them. Jin agreed that they could grow a lot in just 2 or 3 days. He told Sarah that they would pick everything that was ready to be harvested. Jin then looked to the side and noticed the baskets and carts. He asked if Sarah had prepared them. Sarah confirmed that she had simply copied what Jin usually did and wondered if she had missed anything. Jin was surprised that Sarah was starting to properly prepare the necessary tools. At first, he had to instruct her on every little thing, but Sarah was now improving as she gained more experience. Jin felt proud and glad that he had an employee who thought and took action on her own initiative. He commended Sarah and instructed her to start picking the cucumbers. Jin and Sarah went through the cucumbers that were ready to harvest. While enjoying picking cucumbers, Sarah noticed something unusual: a weirdly bent cucumber. She was surprised to see the cucumber in such an odd shape and wondered how it had become like that. She found the cucumber cute and laughed at it. However, Jin claimed that a curved cucumber was not a funny thing since they couldn't be sold at supermarkets due to the regulations they were following. Cucumbers ended up like this due to insufficient water or sunlight. Their harvests were meant for the farmer's market, so they could still be sold, but at lower prices. Jin was working hard to prevent things like this from happening. While Jin counted the bags of cucumbers they had, Sarah looked at the curved cucumber intently. After some time, Jin noticed that they had already picked quite a lot of cucumbers. Sarah then called Jin over and he wondered what was wrong. Sarah was looking at something and told him to check it out. Jin looked at what Sarah had found and discovered a huge cucumber, twice the size of the normal ones. Jin called it a monster cucumber while Sarah called it a king cucumber. The two stared at each other in confusion. Sarah felt flustered hearing it called a monster because of its size on Earth. Jin agreed and then asked why Sarah was surprised to see one too. Sarah exclaimed that she was excited to see it grow bigger than expected. Jin suddenly looked at Sarah with distress. He sighed and started explaining that cucumbers that grew bigger than normal couldn't be sold, and also put a significant amount of pressure on the vines. This was also the root cause of why the other cucumbers curved and reduced the number of cucumbers that were good for harvest. Sarah then realized that this was not a good thing. She asked if it was even at B grade. Jin agreed and doubted that he would be able to sell it. Sarah then wondered why the price went down when the shape and color were irregular. She claimed they might look different, but the nutritional value and taste didn't differ at all. She felt sad that the cucumber's value went down just because it looked different. Jin was taken aback by Sarah's words but soon smiled. He explained that Japan placed a heavy emphasis on the safety of the food consumed. The regulations were strict, and it honestly made him sad that not all the vegetables he produced were accepted. However, as he continued farming, he realized that the vegetables he was planting were going to enter the mouths of all sorts of people. He wanted them to eat with ease. And in that sense, the regulations felt like a promise between producers like him and the consumers that affirmed their dedication to food safety. At the end of the day, it was his responsibility to prevent weird-looking produce. Still, he was lucky that he could sell them at the local farmers market, even at lower prices. Sarah was amazed to hear that Jin had been putting a lot of effort into producing the best vegetables. She wanted to learn more so she could help Jin deliver the best vegetables they were capable of growing. Sarah still expressed her love for the curved and giant cucumbers, but said she would do her best to produce straight cucumbers. That sounded odd, but Jin just laughed. He didn't expect much but supported Sarah. After that, they delivered the cucumbers to the farmer's market. The fake couple got back home at about noon, and Sarah's stomach grumbled like a lion's roar. She expressed how hungry she was, and Jin could tell. They had been picking cucumbers since 5 a.m. and hadn't eaten breakfast. He then asked Sarah what she wanted to eat as he scanned the contents of the fridge. As he closed the door, Sarah smiled beside him and brought out the giant cucumber, wanting to eat something made from it. She had brought over the giant cucumber, assuming there would be more to make with it. Seeing how big it was, Jin realized they couldn't settle for just a mere salad. Suddenly, he thought of something and decided on a dish to make. He brought out eggs and noodles and announced he would make some chilled Chinese noodles. It was the first time Sarah had heard of such a dish, and Jin explained it was a variant of summon. Jin then asked her to cut the giant cucumber into slices. Sarah did so, and while she was cutting the cucumber, Jin made the eggs into thin omelets and sliced them into pieces. He quickly finished preparing the shredded egg crepes. Jin then sliced some ham and added some tomatoes. More or less, he finished preparing the toppings. He smirked as he looked at the perfect assortment he had made. Sarah interrupted him and showed that she had already finished slicing the cucumber. Seeing how overloaded the serving was, Jin realized that the dish would be mostly cucumbers. He let it be and proceeded to make the dish. Sarah's eyes widened as Jin finally finished making the cold Chinese noodle dish. Sarah found the dish pretty and was excited to try it. Jin told her to go ahead, and Sarah didn't hesitate to start eating. She chewed on the noodles and enjoyed the taste. She said it tasted different from summon. Jin agreed that it was great to eat such a dish during the summer. Sarah totally related and continued to eat, picking up the cucumbers. She took a bite and said it still tasted great despite looking different. She claimed it was better to have the bigger ones since they could bring more servings, and Jin scolded her with a, "Hey." Jin continued watching as Sarah enjoyed the meal. He recalled the times when he felt sad and depressed if he received vegetables that didn't meet the regulations. Sarah excitedly asked for another serving. Jin then told her that he wouldn't be sad now because he could see her enjoying the food. Sarah was confused by what Jin meant. Days later, a box arrived at Jin's house and Sarah looked at it with curiosity. She wondered what it was since it hadn't been there the day before. She then approached it, staring intently. Jin appeared and told Sarah it was time to prepare breakfast. He noticed Sarah leaning her head on the box, as if she was trying to hear something inside. She asked what the box was, and Jin explained that it was where the potato sprouts were growing. Since Sarah looked confused, Jin opened the lid of the box. Inside, potatoes were lined up and sprouts had started growing from them. Jin explained that the process of planting potatoes involved making them sprout first in a box, and then planting them in the fields once they had finished sprouting. Sarah was surprised to learn that potatoes were not planted as seeds, but that the potatoes themselves were planted back in the field. Jin explained that this method was better because using potato seeds would take a long time to grow. He mentioned that this was knowledge passed down from their ancestors. Sarah was surprised by the explanation and realized that there were techniques and small details involved in potato planting. She then became excited and asked Jin when they could plant the potatoes. Jin said they needed a bit more time, explaining that they would spend the day plowing the fields again with compost and manure. Jin told Sarah that they would plow the same fields they had worked on last time. Sarah got excited and agreed with Jin. Jin wondered why Sarah was so unusually happy. Soon after, under the bright sunny skies, Jin stared blankly, feeling that something was strange. He watched as Sarah plowed the land with the usual hoe, using controlled strength. Sarah smiled the whole time she worked, and Jin kept staring at her. He couldn't believe that Sarah was no longer wildly swinging her arms and could now figure out the correct locations and ways to dig. He assumed that the old couple had taught her how to use the hoe. This startled Sarah, and she started acting like she didn't know what Jin was talking about. However, she did ask how Jin had figured it out. Jin claimed that Sarah was too good for it to be only her second time plowing their fields. Since he hadn't taught her, Jin concluded that their neighbors must have. Sarah then acted proud, which Jin found annoying. He proceeded to assume that Sarah had practiced swinging the hoe on the mountain out back. Sarah was shocked and assumed that Jin had the powers of farsight and see-through magic. Jin, annoyed, asked, and Sarah exclaimed that it was the only explanation. Suddenly assuming that Jin had see-through magic, Sarah realized something. She then looked at her body and became embarrassed. She covered her chest with her arms and looked at Jin. She asked him strongly if he had seen her naked. Jin got confused. Sarah assumed that Jin had been able to see her naked the whole time. Jin became even more confused. Jin claimed it was just his intuition. He explained that when Sarah was practicing using the hoe, Minori and Shigeru found her. Sarah confirmed that this had happened and shared how the old couple had taught her. She said she had improved thanks to them and was glad because she wanted to help Jin as quickly as possible. She really owed Minori and Shigeru a lot. Jin smiled and told Sarah that the old couple was stricter than most people when it came to farming. He knew that they were convinced to help her because she had shown how hardworking she was. Sarah was taken aback and said she was happy to hear that. Jin then had a premonition. He expected that the old couple would praise Sarah as an amazing wife when he met them. Thanks to Sarah, it didn't take long to finish plowing the fields. September arrived, but it was still blazing outside and Jin couldn't help but complain. He went to the tatami room looking for Sarah. However, Jin was surprised by Kaho, Kaido, and the girls. Jin looked like he had just seen some troublesome people. Sarah then welcomed him back with some tea she had just prepared. Jin angrily asked when the troublesome people had come over. Sarah explained that they had entered through the porch on the side. Jin complained because they hadn't even used the main entrance. Kaho told him not to be narrow-minded since it wasn't every day that such an opportunity fell into his lap. Jin looked confused. Kaho then told Meguru to bring out something. Meguru brought out something that looked like tickets. Jin and Sarah were invited to go to the pool with the others. Soon after in the Jumbo Pool Park, Sarah looked around as she stuttered her words. She was shocked by how many of the people were in the Jumbo Pool. Jin corrected her that they were still in the building, not to pool itself which was outside. Sarah exclaimed she didn't see a lot of people in one place since the festival. Jin reminded her not to get split from the group. Sarah then wondered if people really came over just to soak in some water. Jin intently looked at Sarah until Kaho then called over to come over and check some rental swimsuits. They used the tickets that Kaho and the others won from the raffle in the shopping district, and finally came to the nearby Jumbo Pool. Sarah then asked what were swimsuits. Jin casually explained that they were undergarments they would wear at pools since it was fine for them to get wet. Sarah doesn't have anything like pools in her world. However, there was something more surprising. Alice then approached Sarah and thanked her for coming even though she could not swim. She claimed there was a shallow pool for non-swimmers like her, and decided to stick together. Sarah was thankful to Alice. The concept of swimming as a recreational activity doesn't exist in Sarah's world. Despite being athletic, Sarah doesn't know how to swim. She looked worried after hearing that they would go somewhere with lots of water. Jin then asked if she was really fine and asked her not to force herself. Sarah thanked her for the worries, but she recalled Alika saying that the pool was something that even non-swimmers like her could enjoy. She felt fine and excited since she would be able to wear swimsuits, which she assumed to be a form of specialized armor for such occasions. Jin suddenly felt something amiss. Kaho then called over Sarah to try out some swimsuits. Sarah was glad and turned toward Kaho's direction. Kaho cheerfully held up 2 sets of swimsuits and recommended them for Sarah to wear. She exclaimed the ones she chose would look good along with Sarah's skin tone and blonde hair. Sarah looked like someone who just got a culture shock. Flustered, Sarah asked what they were. Kaho asked for Jin's opinions, but Jin wondered why he was being asked. Kaho reminded him that he was Sarah's husband, and Meguru excitedly agreed. Kaho claimed Sarah would look good with white or blue. Sarah on the background was still flustered seeing swimsuits for the first time. Kaho exclaimed Sarah would also look good with one piece, and the girls agreed. Kotori then started imagining Sarah wearing a cute white one-piece. Meguru wanted to see Sarah wearing something tomboyish. On the other hand, Keiho suggested that Jin might want to see Sarah wearing something racy. The girls were in cloud 9 as they imagined Sarah wearing swimsuits until Sarah herself asked them to wait. She exclaimed that swimsuits were basically underwear and wondered if people really go out wearing something in public. The girls gave her the confused blank stares. Kaho claimed it was normal. Kotori shared that it was indeed embarrassing to expose your skin in public, but everyone does it. While the girls were discussing, Kaito then started thinking about something. He then told them that Sarah had a point. As a man, Kaito was confused why girls are embarrassed when seen in their underwear but perfectly fine being seen while wearing swimsuits. He found the minds of women a mystery. Jin quickly agreed. Kaho wondered what her brother was talking about. She exclaimed swimsuits were meant to be seen while underwear were meant to be hidden. Both were wore for different reasons, so girls also react differently. The boys looked shocked by such wisdom, and the girls gave Kaho a look like they were impressed by a speech. Kaito learned something new and Keiho called her gross. She further exclaimed that swimsuits were designed under the assumption that they would be seen, making it not embarrassing to wear. Sarah then looked at the swimsuits as she realized that it was considered normal on Earth. She then found a swimsuit and claimed it would look good for Jin. Everyone then started holding back their laughter as Jin found himself in an embarrassing situation. Jin exclaimed that men had their own swimsuits. Everyone then burst out laughing. Soon after, we see Jin waiting for a long time for Sarah and Kaho. He did assume that women would take longer in general due to makeup and stuff. Keiho then appeared while wearing a cutesy-looking swimsuit that also shows her beautiful proportion at the same time. All the men around them instantly locked on Kaho's appearance. Kaho then teasingly asked Jin how she looked like. Confused, Jin felt like he was getting a déjà vu. He just simply stated that Kaho looked good. Kaho complained how unoriginal his words were and warned Jin that Sarah was going to leave at this rate. Jin wondered what he did wrong. Kaho then tried to wonder where Sarah went since they came out together. She then found Sarah hiding on a corner and went to get her. Jin watched them as Sarah was embarrassed to come out. Kaho assured her that it was fine since everyone else was wearing swimsuits. People then got their attention on Sarah, who was walking toward the poolside. Sarah appeared with a cute swimsuit that also outlines her otherworldly body while her hair in braids. She then turned red out of embarrassment and then thanked Jin for waiting for her. She then asked him if she looked weird in her swimsuit. Flustered, Jin claimed Sarah looked good. Kaho noticed how Jin reacted differently from how he reacted to her. The two then argued with each other. Sarah looked around and noticed a lot of people enjoying the pool she was seeing for the first time. She suddenly turned excited, totally forgetting about the embarrassment of wearing a swimsuit. Jin and Kaho were glad and invited Sarah to regroup with the others. Jin reminded them to shower first. While other people continued to enjoy the pool, Sarah and Jin went to the shower area first. Sarah was surprised to see a lot of shower heads. She then asked why they needed to shower before going into the water. Jin explained that the showers could remove any dirt on their bodies and help them get used to the cold water. Sarah was still surprised by how many shower heads there were, as if they were waiting just for them. Jin admitted that the water pressure was also quite strong. While the fake couple continued staring at the shower heads, Keiho arrived and turned on the shower. Sarah and Jin were surprised by the sudden surge of cold water. Keiho laughed at their shocked expressions and held her sides as she laughed harder. Jin then told Sarah to hold Kaho. Sarah didn't hesitate, and Kaho quickly realized how strong Sarah was. She complained about how cold the water was as Jin turned on the showers. He watched the two girls enjoy the shower together, making him smile in the end. Soon after, the three met up with Kaito and the girls. Kaho thanked them for waiting. The girls then checked out Sarah's figure, top and bottom, looking as if they had just seen a new goddess to revere. Meanwhile, Kaito was crying in the background. The girls started complimenting Sarah's appearance and body line. Kaito fell to his knees, expressing how it was better than he had expected. Flustered, Sarah asked if Kaito was alright. Kaito continued staring at Sarah as she was a treat for the eyes. Sarah didn't know what to say. Suddenly, Kaho kicked her brother, exclaiming that what he was doing was sexual harassment and called him gross. Kaito complained about being kicked, but Kaho insisted he deserved it since he was acting gross. Surprisingly, Alice also agreed that Kaito was gross. Kaito felt hurt. Kaho then noticed Jin and asked him to forgive her brother. Jin asked why Kaho was singling him out. Keiho claimed Jin looked really pissed off. Jin hadn't even noticed he was wearing an angry expression. Kaho understood that any man would get mad if another man stared at their wife like that. Jin was confused since he had just realized he was getting mad about someone staring at Sarah who wasn't even his real wife. He admitted to himself that he did get a bit annoyed. He then looked at Sarah, who, in response, cutely gave him a confused look. Jin suddenly got flustered and told himself that he might be misunderstanding things. Meguru called Jin and asked how they looked in their swimsuits. Without Jin saying anything, Meguru knew that he was looking down on them. Meguru said that wasn't how a gentleman should act and assumed that Kaho also got mad at him for doing the same to her. Jin sighed, knowing he could get in trouble if he looked at the girls the way they wanted him to. Meguru gritted her teeth and decided to bring out their secret weapon. She then grabbed someone and brought Kotori in front of Jin. Kotori was shocked and quickly turned red. Jin responded blankly again, but Meguru noticed it was different from how he reacted to them. Jin just said, and Meguru insisted that he reacted differently to Kotori. Jin denied this and told her to stop the farce and go to the pool instead. As he looked to the side, he discovered that Sera was pouting with anger. Sera insisted that Jin had taken a few seconds longer while looking at Kotori. Oh ho, someone was jealous. Jin was shocked and hoped that Sera was not like Meguru. Sera exclaimed that Kotori was still a child, and called Jin inappropriate. This shocked and hurt Jin. He asked her not to read too much into it. Meguru could see a marriage falling apart, and Kotori asked her to stop. Kaito, another oblivious man, wondered what was wrong with Sera. Kaho called the fake couple pure, seeing how possessive they were with each other. Soon after, the group finally went to the pool, and Meguru gave Sera a swimming ring. Sera asked what it was, and Jin explained that it would help her float while holding it. Alice then invited Sera to the shallow area. Sera stepped onto the pool side and looked at the water below her. It was her first time seeing so much water at once. She noticed how it was moving and shaking and felt scared to dip into it. The other girls went into the pool and called for Sera to join them. Sera looked taken aback and Jin asked if she was okay. Sera claimed she was fine but suddenly apologized for imposing. She asked him to lend his hand as she was scared to get into the water. Jin was surprised and agreed to help her as he went into the water first. He held out his hand towards Sera, who started blushing. She then took Jin's hand and slowly went into the water. Sera was speechless and surprised as she finally took a dip into the water. She found the cool feeling pleasant and finally experienced what a pool was like. Sera began gliding along the water, giggling as she felt the cool sensation. Suddenly, she found herself being carried away, catching her off guard. Jin then explained that the pool had man-made currents. The pool they were in was called a lazy river, which surprised Sera because she didn't know pools could be different. Feeling uneasy being swept along by the current, Sera instinctively tried to resist. Jin reminded her that a pool wasn't something to struggle against. Unexpectedly, Sera was bumped into by Alice, who was playing around. Alice advised Sera not to stay in one spot in a lazy river. Meguru then emerged from the water, surprising Sera. Kotori suggested to Meguru and Alice that they tease Sera since she seemed uncomfortable in the pool. The girls gathered around Sera, keeping an eye on her. Sera was relieved that they were concerned about her and expressed her gratitude. She admitted that she had been scared at first but was now enjoying herself, thanks to them. As the girls chatted, Jin simply stood there with a smile on his face. Then Kaito floated in and admitted feeling envious seeing Jin happy while watching his wife. This made Jin angry, and the girls watched as he attempted to dunk Kaito underwater. Kaho complained about the adults acting like children while Meguru found it amusing and joined the two men in the water. Initially feeling uncomfortable, Sera eventually found herself enjoying her time in the pool. Suddenly, Meguru declared it was time for the main event and encouraged everyone to try the enormous water slide. Sera was taken aback by the sight and turned to Jin for an explanation. Jin described it as a slide with water flowing down it. Despite knowing it was a water slide, Sera couldn't shake the feeling that it resembled a castle belonging to a demon lord. Jin wondered if she was scared, and although Sera insisted she wasn't, her excuses didn't convince him. He could tell she was frightened. Suddenly, everyone was cheering for Alice as she finally reached 47 inches in height. This meant she could finally ride the slide this year. Alice looked happy that she had grown taller by 2 inches. Meguru then teased Alice for being short last year, which had prevented her from riding the water slide. Alice retaliated by attacking Meguru for belittling her height. Sera could see that the girls were excited about riding the slide. Jin advised Sera not to push herself, but Sera insisted on challenging the water slide. At the top of the water slide, an employee showed them where to start sliding. The sight frightened Sera, as it looked like the mouth of a monster. Meguru eagerly announced that she would go first, and Kaho wished her to have fun. She then sat at the mouth of the slide and quoted a line from a certain mecha anime before taking off. Sera watched nervously as Meguru went down with a scream. Alice bravely stepped forward, ready to go next. Kotori exclaimed that she would go after Alice. Sera encouraged herself not to be afraid, seeing how much fun the girls were having on the slide. She reminded herself of how she had entered the mouths of giant frogs in her world before. Jin commented that she was psyching herself up in the wrong way. Shortly after, it was Sera's turn, and she perched herself at the mouth of the slide. She attempted to muster her courage with a speech, but her words were cut short as she screamed upon slipping and entering the water slide. Jin followed, sliding down quietly, his mind filled with concern for Sera, who had gone before him. He closed his eyes, reminiscing about his childhood joy of sliding down the same slide. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice in distress, wondering why it had stopped. Jin swiftly opened his eyes and stood up, calling out for Sera, who trembled with fear, frozen in place. He assured her that he had come to help her move forward. Jin finally reached Sera, who remained motionless. Sera turned to look at Jin as she heard his voice. Jin then appeared behind her unexpectedly, like a knight on a white horse. Sera blushed upon realizing how close Jin was to her. The water pushed Jin a bit further, causing their skins to touch. Jin apologized to Sarah, his words making her nervous as they were spoken directly near her ears. Suddenly, Sarah had a flashback of that particular night with Jin. Jin called her name once more, which caught her off guard. Feeling a sudden jolt as Jin touched her shoulder, she was startled. He told her to brace herself because he was about to get a bit rough. Sarah blushed suddenly and voiced her complaint to Jin, urging him to just go ahead and do it already. Her words left Jin momentarily puzzled. As the saying goes, what happens in the water slide stays in the water slide. We witnessed how Sarah felt scared and uneasy around the pool. Yet she found joy in the pool more than anyone else. She kept returning to the water slide and even tried out others with the girls. She breathed heavily and laughed while expressing how enjoyable the pool was. Jin noticed that Sarah was pushing herself too hard. When the other girls invited Sarah to the water slide again, Jin intervened. He reminded them to have lunch first since it was almost noon. The girls were having so much fun that they lost track of time. Now that they were discussing food, they realized they were hungry and started listing the dishes they wanted to eat. Jin teased them for being simple. Meanwhile, his wife stood nearby, her stomach making its presence known with grumbles. Jin just hoped they wouldn't empty out the poolside restaurants. Jin and the girls went to the food area, where Kaho and Kaito had already secured tables and seats. Sarah thanked Kaho for reserving them. Despite it not being quite noon yet, the place was bustling. Kaho worried about Sarah catching a cold, so she had her wear a pareo, which looked good on Sarah. Sarah expressed her gratitude, but Kaho insisted that Sarah always looked stunning no matter what she wore. Jin fretted that Sarah was turning into Kaho's dress-up doll. When it was time to get food, Jin remained seated and asked Kaho to accompany Sarah, who wasn't accustomed to buying food at places like the pool. Sarah assured Jin that she had it covered and went to consult Sarah about her food preferences. Left behind, Jin found himself in the company of Kotori, who sat down next to him. She was tasked with holding their seats for the adjacent table. Kotori suggested it was better for Kaito to assist Meguru and Alice. Jin didn't respond to her suggestion, and their awkward exchange came to an end. Suddenly, Kotori began to fidget and squirm. Jin could clearly see that Kotori was feeling uncomfortable. He realized it was their first time being alone together and assumed that Kotori was uneasy about it. Then they accidentally locked eyes and Kotori became flustered. Awkwardly, she initiated a conversation about the hot weather, while Jin simply stared at her, unsure of what to say. Kotori started to panic, apologizing for not knowing how to start a conversation. Jin was too surprised to respond, observing a middle schooler struggling to engage in conversation out of consideration. Eventually, Jin mentioned the idea of enjoying something refreshing in the hot weather. They continued talking about different foods like chilled Chinese noodles and seafood bowls. The conversation flowed and Kotori felt relieved and happy. Sarah returned with a food tray, unable to decide what to get. She spoke about her indecision, but the items on her tray contradicted her words. Then she urged Jin and Kotori to select their meals. Jin opted for udon, having already eaten chilled Chinese noodles with Sarah at home. He remembered Kotori had gone for chilled noodles, and seeing the crowded place, he worried she might have gotten lost. Scanning the area, he spotted some men talking to Kotori. Unsure if they were her acquaintances, Jin observed that Kotori seemed uneasy. Realizing his course of action, Jin stepped forward and called out to Kotori. Startled, Kotori turned to look at him. The men, disappointed that Kotori had a boyfriend, backed off. Jin positioned himself beside Kotori, who still appeared unsettled. He clarified to the men that he was Kotori's guardian, questioning why grown men were showing interest in a middle schooler. The men were incredulous to learn Kotori's age, as she insisted she was in middle school. They claimed she looked older, like a high school or college student. Jin instructed the men to leave and find someone else. The men had departed and Kotori felt sorry. Jin inquired about her apology. Kotori explained she wished she could have spoken up for herself. Jin advised her to stop saying sorry since the men she encountered were overly assertive. He encouraged her to seek assistance when necessary. He suggested sticking with Kaito since he was physically imposing and reliable. Kotori was amazed to speak, noticing Jin's smile. She became flustered, attempting to articulate her thoughts. Memories of her brief interactions with Jin flooded back. She reminded him of their conversations and how he had come to her rescue. She expressed gratitude for Jin's support. Jin realized that Kotori was truly a good person. However, he still wanted Kaito and even Sarah to stay close to Kotori for safety. Kotori wondered if Sarah could assist. Jin realized that the others were unaware of Sarah's strength. Shortly after, the girls' eyes widened and their jaws dropped when they saw the cleaned-up plates in front of them. Sarah began giggling as she brought over another serving of tonkatsu. She casually picked up the food and enjoyed it without a care in the world, wondering why the food at the pool park tasted so good. The girls watched her silently, glancing at Sarah's belly, wondering where all the food was going. To their surprise, Sarah wanted another serving of ramen, but her plan was thwarted by Jin, who returned with his own food. After finishing their meal, the girls decided to have more fun by playing in the pool. Kaho wondered where Sarah wanted to go next. Sarah revealed that something had caught her eye and pointed at the fortress-like facility. Kaho recognized it as the obstacle course. The girls then headed to the obstacle course together. Jin watched from a distance, a smile spreading across his face. He felt happy seeing Sarah having a good time in the pool. Taking a moment to rest, he sat down in the water feeling refreshed. Kaito joined him, chuckling at how lively the girls were compared to them, the older folks who needed to take it easy. He mentioned how simply lounging in the shallow pool had its own appeal, a sentiment Jin wholeheartedly agreed with. Their relaxation was suddenly interrupted by a sudden splash of water. They grumbled about the cold, only to hear laughter behind them. Meguru and Kaho were amused, teasing them for acting like they were in a retirement home. Jin and Kaito stared blankly at them and started stretching. They decided to capture the two and began running toward Kaho and Meguru. Sarah checked what the commotion was about and discovered Kaito and Jin holding down Kaho and Meguru. Jin told Kaito about the waterfall, and Kaito agreed that it was time for an endurance test. Jin remembered how they used the waterfall's endurance test as punishment back in their days. Suddenly, Meguru got scared and called out to Sarah for help, saying that the guys were bullying her. Jin was flustered and claimed that calling out to Sarah for help was cheating. Kaito wondered why it would be cheating if Sarah helped. Sarah then appeared out of nowhere from above and made a superhero landing in the shallow pool. She wondered if there would be an aquatic battle. Everyone was confused and shocked by how cool her entrance was. Sarah then told Jin and Kaito to release Meguru and Kaho. Kaito smirked and informed Sarah that he had made it to the national competitions with his judo and karate skills and wondered if Sarah would take on the challenge. Sarah excitedly agreed, assuming that Kaito was trained in some martial art and told him not to hold back. Kaito got fired up and told Sarah to make him taste the water. A minute later, Kaito found himself gazing up at the sky. Confusion washed over him when he realized Sarah had brought him down. Sarah wondered if Kaito wasn't taking things seriously. Kaito, initially stunned, eventually managed to smile. Keiho was surprised that Sarah had actually taken down her supposedly strong brother. The girls admired Sarah's coolness, impressed that she knew some martial arts. Jin, staring blankly at them, wondered what was happening. He was relieved there were no other people around, given it was lunchtime. Kaito then attempted another attack, but Sarah saw it coming. She deflected Kaito's hand and seized it instead. Kaito was shocked at being countered, and Sarah called him naive. Kaito's scream echoed as he was sent crashing to the ground. The girls were impressed by Sarah's skills and strength. Suddenly, Jin felt a sense of déjà vu as Sarah approached him. Sarah declared it was Jin's turn. She appeared cool, menacing, and captivating all at once. Jin continued to stare blankly until he smirked. He confidently asserted that he was the kind of guy who showed up when it mattered. But a second later, it was Jin's turn to cry out in pain. The girls labeled him as weak. Shortly after, Kaito said they were going to swim. Jin encouraged them to go ahead, and the girls mentioned they were heading to the lazy pool. Jin stayed behind, pondering when the others would tire themselves out. Alice then came up to him, searching for the rest of the group. Jin informed her that they had gone for a swim. Alice, not being able to swim herself, felt let down. Jin proposed that she join the others in the lazy pool, but Alice declined with a shake of her head. Suddenly, she sounded determined and told Jin that she wanted to learn how to swim. Later, in an indoor pool, Keiho stepped forward, explaining that she had forgotten how she was taught to swim, but didn't mind showing her own swimming style. She then asked if her students were ready. In front of her, Alice and Sarah knelt, requesting her to teach them. Seeing their stiffness, Kaho advised them to relax since they were learning to swim. She even pointed out how tense Sarah was. Alice then thanked Sarah for being with her. Sarah mentioned she also wanted to learn how to swim. Keiho reassured them not to worry, and reminded them to wear swimming caps and goggles since they were using the competitive swimming pool. Sarah and Alice then put them on, and Kaho instructed them to take their time adjusting them properly. Since she knew that the two were okay with the lazy pool, Kaho assumed that they weren't afraid of the water. The two admitted they weren't scared of getting into the water, but they were hesitant about going underwater. Alice said she sinks easily, and Sarah confessed she'd never tried swimming before. So, Keiho suggested they start with breathing and floating. She told them to take a deep breath, dive underwater, and breathe out through their nose. She reminded them to put on goggles first. Confused, Sarah asked Jin what the goggles were for. He explained they were to keep water out of her eyes and let her see underwater. Sarah was surprised she could see underwater with them. Kaho then told her to take her time. Sarah put on the goggles and felt relieved that water couldn't get into her eyes. Kaho reminded them to relax and reviewed the steps. Sarah went underwater first and Alice followed. Tense, Sarah realized it was her turn. However, she was scared to get into the water since it was intimidating. She reminded herself it wasn't the time to get cold feet. However, she remained frozen, with Jin just staring blankly at her. Jin watched as Sarah struggled and stepped in to help. He reassured her that everything would be okay, reminding her of how she had initially been afraid of the pool. He assured her that she wasn't in any danger. Encouraging her to relax and give it a try, Sarah thanked him for the support and took a deep breath. With determination, she submerged herself underwater, slowly opening her eyes. As the underwater world came into focus, she marveled at its beauty. Feeling weightless, she giggled with joy as she spun around, noticing the sparkling water around her. Suddenly, she felt like everything around her was wobbly and cute. She thought the underwater world was amazing. Then, someone touched her. It was Jin, dressed in a knight's white uniform. She wondered if a prince had come for her, but Jin angrily shouted that he was no prince. Jin emerged from the water with Sarah, surprising the others. He called her an idiot for forgetting to breathe. Kaho was surprised that Sarah had been underwater the whole time and admired her lung capacity. Jin and Kaho checked on Sarah, who was still out of it. They wondered why she looked happy and kept sleep-talking. Worried, Kaho told Jin to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Jin didn't have a choice since Kaho asked. He already knew that Sarah was tougher compared to Earthlings and would probably recover soon. He still went ahead to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but suddenly Sarah mentioned her prince and woke up. She exclaimed it was too soon for a kiss from the prince. Sarah groaned in pain as she felt her forehead aching. She was confused to see Alice and Kaho in front of her and asked what had happened. Kaho claimed they had brought someone back to life but lost one in the process. Alice was relieved that Sarah was back. Sarah was confused about what they were talking about and looked around at her surroundings. She then discovered Jin unconscious. She panicked and asked if Jin had drowned. Jin called her a princess and reminded her to practice her underwater breathing. Sarah kept practicing swimming, and Kaho praised her for looking comfortable diving underwater. Kaho then showed her how to float. She wanted them to try turtle floating first, and she demonstrated it. Excited, Sarah and Alice quickly copied her, creating a surreal scene that looked like a pool murder case to Jin. After a while, Kaho praised the two for doing well and being fast learners. The two girls were happy, and Jin watched them excitedly continue their swimming practice. The practice went on until Sarah got used to the water. She felt amazed, like she was floating in the sky. As she giggled, she realized she was running out of oxygen and resurfaced. Kaho commented that Sarah's form was perfect. Managing to float for the first time made Sarah feel good, and Kaho agreed. Sarah was even happier because her ability to survive in water had improved. Kaho suggested they pair up for the next part. Since the two beginners already had their streamlined form down, Kaho wanted to teach them how to push off next. Sarah was confused, so Jin explained that Kaho was talking about the posture that reduces resistance when moving through the water. Kaho explained that pushing off means kicking their feet against the pool wall and then moving forward as fast as they could while keeping the streamlined form. The beginners found it difficult, but Kaho knew they would be fine. Kaho then demonstrated how to do it. She sank into the water and kicked off the pool wall. The girls were impressed to see her move far without doing anything. Kaho explained that it was an important swimming technique that they should master. 10 minutes later, Jin stared blankly at Sarah, who kept sinking. Sarah wondered why, and Jin asked her to take things seriously. Sarah exclaimed she was being serious, but for some reason she would sink before kicking off the wall. She felt depressed because of it. Just then, Kaho started praising Alice for pushing off well. Sarah was impressed to see Alice doing well, and hoped she could do it too. Jin asked Kaho to take Alice for a break, and Kaho agreed because she was thirsty too. After the two girls left, Jin told Sarah to try again with him. He said they were lucky to have the pool to themselves. He wanted her to give it another try without holding back since he knew Sarah was worried about Kaho and Alice. Sarah's eyes widened as she finally realized what had been making her feel uneasy. Jin was surprised she hadn't figured it out earlier. Sarah asked if it was okay to go all out. Jin agreed but reminded her not to break anything. To be safe, Jin moved a bit further away and told Sarah to start whenever she was ready. Sarah looked determined and put on her goggles again. She remembered she had to maintain her form and then found the right moment to kick off the pool's wall. A huge splash happened, leaving Jin too stunned to speak. Sarah resurfaced behind Jin, surprising him because he couldn't see her at all. As Jin stared at Sarah, her swimsuit came off. Sarah then faced Jin, revealing her bare chest. Jin stood there frozen, and Sarah got flustered, realizing her top was gone. She panicked and asked Jin not to look. Kaho's loud voice asked what happened since they heard an explosion. The two panicked, and Jin asked Sarah to put something on quickly. The swimming practice continued, and it was Jin's turn to help Alice. He praised her for doing great. He told her to check how far she had swum. Alice was surprised by her own progress. Just then, the others showed up and were shocked to see Alice had learned how to swim. Meguru excitedly jumped into the pool and dove into the water. She then came up behind Alice and hugged her to praise her hard work. Kotori came running, scolding Meguru for getting into the pool without a swimming cap. Meguru apologized for being too excited. Kotori was happy that the three of them could now swim together. Meguru suggested playing tag in the water. Alice was surprised at first but then agreed with her friends. Jin watched the girls playing and was glad to see them smiling happily together. Beside Jin, Kaito was also watching the girls while crying a lot. He was so proud of Alice. Jin asked why Kaito was acting like he was Alice's dad. Kaito said he was basically the girls' second father for looking after them all the time. Jin wondered if that was true since Kaito didn't interact with the kids that much. He couldn't understand why seeing them grow made Kaito so emotional. Kaito exclaimed that Jin was always heartless. He told Jin to imagine having kids with Sarah one day. Kaito's words made Jin flustered. Kaito said that Jin and Sarah would have cute kids, and even the stone-hearted Jin would soften. Jin then started imagining a future where he and Sarah had a kid and lived happily together. Kaito asked if that would be adorable. He also promised to spoil Jin's kids when the time came. Jin asked him to stop being creepy and fantasizing. Kotori noticed the men arguing. She was then surprised by Meguru, who grabbed her. Meguru paused for a moment as she noticed something. She then exclaimed how Kotori had gotten bigger. Kotori and Alice then called her the worst. Seeing the kids enjoy the pool, Kaito couldn't help but comment that days like this were what summer break was all about. Watching the girls enjoy the pool together, Kaito felt that they, the adults, were also having a summer break. Kaito then remembered Sarah learning how to swim with Alice and asked where she was. Jin looked anxious and sighed, which confused Kaito. Jin said Sarah was swimming with Kaho in the advanced swimming lane. There they saw Sarah and Kaho doing butterfly strokes like they were in the Olympics. Sarah was challenging Kaho to a race. Their competition drew a crowd, making people wonder if the two girls were professional swimmers. Except for Jin, the rest of the group was confused and shocked. Their confusion turned into amazement as Sarah and Kaho continued their competition. Kaito knew that his sister had trained in swimming, but seeing Sarah keep up with her shocked him. He gave the husband a strange look. He confirmed with Jin that Sarah, like Alice, was a beginner swimmer, but somehow Sarah was doing well now. She looked like she was already swimming at a professional level. Meanwhile, Sarah and Kaho got close to the goal and finished almost at the same time. Everyone cheered because it was a close race between the girls. Sarah asked who won, and Jin confirmed that Kaho was a bit faster. Sarah felt frustrated. Still, Kaho was impressed with Sarah's sudden improvement. Sarah credited Kaho and Jin for being good instructors. Kaho shyly accepted the compliment but also gave one back, saying that Sarah would soon win the next time they raced. Sarah then asked for another race, but Kaho refused. She said she knew she would lose, and as Sarah's coach didn't want her to surpass her for now. Sarah called her unfair and Kaho kind of agreed. Jin just smiled as the two girls argued. Kaito then mentioned how Sarah was exceptionally good at martial arts and swimming. He found it unusual and asked Jin the truth about where he met Sarah. Jin was surprised by Kaito's quick thinking and paused for a moment. He admitted that he found Sarah in his rice field. Kaito couldn't believe him, but it was completely true. Since it was getting late in the afternoon, Jin suggested they head back home. The girls said they had fun, and Kaho reminded everyone to rinse off before leaving. Sarah then looked for Alice. Jin pointed out that Alice was resting because she was tired. Sarah offered to carry Alice. Alice asked if Sarah had fun. Sarah confirmed that she enjoyed playing in the pool with everyone. She wholeheartedly thanked everyone for the experience. Meguru smirked and exclaimed that their day hadn't ended yet. Confused, Sarah asked what she meant. Meguru said they couldn't end a day at the pool without something. Everyone then went to the nearby drink vending machine and got some refreshments. The girls enjoyed drinking cola, but it was Jin who paid for them. Jin noticed Sarah being hesitant and reminded her that the drink was carbonated. Sarah decided to drink slowly while enjoying the late afternoon vibes. After taking a few sips, Sarah expressed that she felt sad about leaving. Jin agreed since it had been a long time since he had a fun day outside with others. The pool was near where he lived, but he never wanted to go there with others. Jin was able to hang out with others now, like when he was a child, because of Sarah. He said it might be the last chance to visit the pool this year, and suggested they could have more opportunities next year. Sarah was taken aback by Jin's words and expression. She then agreed to come back with the others again next year. Sarah's next goal was to eat everything on the menu. Jin thought Sarah had already eaten everything during lunch. The next day, Jin's phone alarm went off early in the morning and Jin couldn't believe it was morning already. She paused for a while and then felt sluggish. Surprisingly, she didn't feel like working that day. She had chosen farming because she wanted to, but for some reason she didn't want to get up. She then remembered how hard it was to switch gears after a vacation. She could have slept for 2 or 3 more hours, but decided to get up. She recalled going to the summer festival and pool with Sarah. She still couldn't shake off the vacation feeling. Just when she thought Sarah would be feeling the same sluggish mood, Sarah appeared, asking what they would do. Jin was speechless, seeing Sarah full of energy. The fake couple then went outside to plant potatoes in Jin's fields. Their task for the day was to dig roughly 6-inch furrows in the ridges they made last time. After that, they would place the seed potatoes within the furrows 1 foot apart. and cover them with soil. Jin sighed as he felt too lazy to do any work and wondered if he would feel that way all day. He then saw Sarah talking to a potato like she was putting a baby to bed. She wished the potato would get lots of nutrients afterward. Jin watched Sarah for a while before reminding her about the carrot field. The two soon went to the carrot field and Sarah was surprised to see many carrots growing. Jin said this batch of carrots was ready to be harvested because they had grown enough. Sarah remembered Jin mentioning that it was hard to grow carrots. Jin confirmed this, explaining that carrots have trouble absorbing water and are sensitive to humidity. They also need to be watered and weeded frequently. Sarah decided to call the carrots fragile princesses and was happy they grew so well. She then asked what to do with the carrots. Jin explained they were thinning the carrots, meaning they would pull out the ones that hadn't reached the desired size. This made Sarah and her imaginary carrot princess freak out. She couldn't believe Jin was being harsh to the princesses. Jin reminded Sarah that she had done a lot of thinning out with other fruits already. Sarah was scared because she thought of the carrots as princesses. Jin couldn't believe Sarah still had her strange style and made it clear they wouldn't throw away the carrots but only thin them out. He said the leaves were edible, which made Sarah excited. Jin was amazed at how quickly Sarah changed her mind. Sarah said she was just happy that nothing would go to waste. Jin sat down and reminded her that this was something they needed to do when growing vegetables. Sarah agreed somewhat since she had been watching Jin carefully the whole time. She always saw him get up early in the morning and worried about whether the vegetables would grow properly or not. She also noticed that Jin didn't look energetic that day. She had reasons for wanting to take care of Jin's vegetables as best as she could. Jin was surprised and then smiled. He apologized to Sarah, but Sarah asked why. She said that every day something would be different. Whether it was Jin, the vegetables, the earth, the grass, the flowers, the sky, the clouds, the smell of the wind, or the sun. The idea of meeting new things when she woke up filled her with energy, making her restless and eager to work every day. Every day was fresh and new for her. Jin recalled the times when he had just started farming. He looked at the cheerful Sarah and finally understood what she really liked. He slapped himself and said his brain had finally woken up. Then he asked Sarah to get things done. Sarah was happy that Jin was motivated and agreed to take care of things. Jin reminded her that they would work until evening if things weren't done quickly. Soon after, they finished pruning the carrots and Sarah saw how orderly they looked. She hoped the carrots would grow well. She then asked what kind of dishes Jin would make with the carrot leaves. Jin stared at her blankly, knowing she was just excited about food. He said they would find out once they got home. Later in the kitchen, Sarah asked what they could make with the carrot leaves they had gathered. Jin said there were many options like salad, ohitashi, emino, and soup. However, these were side dishes and not main dishes. After some thinking, Jin decided to make some kakiage but quickly realized that making fried food was a hassle. Hearing this dish name for the first time, Sarah asked what it was. Because of that, they decided to make kakiage using carrot leaves. Jin then brought out more ingredients like frozen shrimp, soybeans, and some onions. He asked Sarah to chop the carrot leaves and slice the onions. Sarah happily helped with the ingredient preparation. Jin then turned to the stove to start frying the frozen shrimp. He poured a large amount of oil to heat in the pan. Sarah was shocked to see so much oil in the pan. Jin reminded her that they were making kakiage, but Sarah still didn't know what kind of dish it was. Jin told her she would understand later and reminded her to continue with what she was doing. After Sarah chopped and sliced everything, Jin prepared the batter by dissolving flour and starch in water. Then he put the rest of the ingredients into the same bowl while Sarah watched the ingredients mix with the white liquid she was seeing for the first time. Jin mixed them evenly and then proceeded with frying. Using a ladle, he shaped the vegetables together and put them into the oil. The sizzling sound made Sarah shriek. Jin looked unimpressed seeing Sarah stuck in the corner of the ceiling like Spider-Man. Jin told her there was nothing to be scared of, but Sarah denied that she was scared. She claimed she was just surprised since it was the same kind of oil she was used to. Jin agreed that some people hated oil because it would sometimes fly out of the pan. He suggested that Sarah should keep her distance. Suddenly, Jin got hit by a random oil splash and Sarah got worried. She noticed the oil making louder sounds after more vegetables were put into it. Jin told her that he was frying at 340 degrees. Sarah was shocked since it was the same temperature used by demonic oilmancers in her world. Jin asked her not to compare the oil to such things. He claimed sizzling food at that temperature made a good kakiage delicious. Sarah was in awe seeing a new fried dish for the first time. Jin then took a bite and Sarah protested. Jin claimed it was a privilege for the cook to taste what he was cooking. He then commented on how exquisite the taste was, making Sarah tremble with jealousy. Sarah then asked for her turn to fry. Jin recalled that Sarah was scared of the oil, but Sarah claimed she had a great plan. Jin didn't trust her and told her to keep a safe distance instead. However, Jin's idea of a safe distance between himself and Sarah became dangerous. Sarah stood behind him, reaching her hand forward as if using Jin as a shield. Flustered, Jin asked what she was doing. Sarah told him to wait and see. Suddenly, a magic circle appeared in front of Jin. She explained it was a magic barrier that would shield Jin from the flying oil. She proudly said it was the same barrier they used against the demon's oil attacks. She claimed she could now help Jin with the frying and would have the same privilege of tasting the food. Jin sighed and asked if 2 hands were needed to deploy the barrier. Sarah claimed 1 hand was enough. Jin then asked Sarah to fry on her own since her other hand would be free. Sarah just realized that and asked Jin to teach her how to fry. However, the last one was already done frying. Sarah picked the Isekai'd up from the oil and thanked Jin for the meal. Jin told her to stop, but there was no stopping Sarah from eating the hot Isekai'd. She exclaimed how hot it was, and Jin reminded her that it had been frying at a high temperature, of course. Jin then gave her advice when eating fried food to take out a small piece and demonstrated it very well. Sarah then opened her mouth asking for a bite. Jin stood there frozen, processing in his head if Sarah wanted him to feed her. Jin then pushed the food into Sarah's mouth. Sarah then munched the food and Jin asked how it tasted. Blushing, Sarah claimed her heart was beating so fast that she forgot to taste the food properly. Jin blamed her and Sarah realized it would be better to eat it normally. Sarah excitedly brought the plate of Isekai'd to the table. Jin agreed that it was a hassle frying when living alone. However, living with someone to eat with daily gave him the energy to make dishes he normally wouldn't make. Another day had come, and Sarah guided Jin and Kaito to a secluded spot. Jin asked if Sarah was certain they were taking the right path. With a bright expression on her face, Sarah confirmed that it was the fastest and safest route to reach the river. She was confident about it, having hiked the mountains every day. Kaito couldn't believe Jin was letting Sarah venture out alone, but she claimed it was the perfect place for her to unwind and exercise. Kaito was glad to see Sarah looking energetic in her waders, but he was concerned about the sword she carried. Jin asked him to ignore it, explaining that it was Sarah's family tradition. Moreover, it was a useful tool for warding off boars and bears. Soon after, the trio finally arrived at the riverside. Kaito was impressed that they had made it faster than usual. Jin reminisced about the times they played as kids in the river. Sarah took a dip in the water and started playing like a carefree child. She then asked what they were going to fish for. Jin revealed that their target was a fish called Ayu. Sarah looked excited and Kaito was glad he had invited the couple. It was worth noting that Kaito had randomly appeared and invited them to fish for Ayu. As they prepared, Sarah listened to the serene sound of nature. Even Jin was enjoying the peaceful atmosphere, with his negative thoughts slowly fading away. However, Sarah ruined the tranquility by asking if Ayu was really tasty, having heard some things about it from Kaito already. Jin realized that Sarah had come for her appetite, not the ambiance. Jin agreed that Ayu was indeed tasty. Sarah was thrilled at the prospect of eating some later. Given her voracious appetite, she could easily empty an area of Ayu. Jin was unsure how much they could catch and reminded her that Kaito was the one with the fishing gear. Just then, Kaito announced that the fishing rod was ready. Sarah's excitement got paused as she froze upon seeing the fishing rods. She was taken aback by their appearance and referred to them as long spears. Jin, on the other hand, commented on how short they were, considering they were fishing for Ayu. Kaito reassured him not to worry, as he had the perfect lure. Jin looked puzzled, and Kaito shared that he had recently discovered that Ayu could be caught with lures, similar to decoy fishing. Jin realized that this was the reason Kaito had suggested going fishing. Kaito chuckled and said that when trying something new, it was always more enjoyable with friends. Sarah, looking confused, asked what the two guys were discussing. Jin explained that they were talking about their fishing method, as decoy fishing was typically used to catch Ayu. Since Sarah was unfamiliar with the concept, Jin elaborated on how Ayu's staple food was the moss growing on the rocks in the river. They tended to establish territories around the rocks with moss on them, and if an intruder entered their turf, they would slam their bodies against each other to chase it away. Decoy fishing took advantage of this behavior. One would attach a hook to an Ayu that would serve as a decoy, then release it into the water. The decoy would swim around, and since it was intruding on another Ayu's territory, the resident Ayu would attack it. Once it attacked the decoy, it would get snagged on the hook, allowing the angler to reel it in and catch it. They usually used live bait when decoy fishing, but this time they were going to try using a lure, a fake bait that looked real but wasn't. Kaito then instructed the couple to choose their baits. Sarah picked hers and was surprised by how realistic it looked. Jin, however, was skeptical about its effectiveness, doubting that it would work on Ayu. Kaito was excited to find out. The trio then stepped into the water, and Kaito told them to cast their lines downstream first. Sarah looked uncertain, but Jin reassured her that he would guide her through the process. Kaito explained that the best Ayu were usually found in areas with the strongest currents, and advised them to cast their lines there to start. Sarah's eyes lit up at the word cast, thinking it might involve magic, but Jin clarified that it simply meant sending their lines out into the water. Jin asked Sarah if she had any experience with fishing in her world. She replied that while she knew people went fishing, she had never tried it herself. Her incredible strength would often break the tools, and she was chased away by others who told her she wasn't suited for fishing. Jin realized that there were indeed things that Sarah couldn't do. He encouraged her to give it a try, but to take it easy and not overdo it. He suggested that she focus on enjoying the atmosphere as they let their lines dangle in the water. Sarah paused for a moment, then nodded in agreement with Jin's words. She thanked him for his advice and promised to try her best. Jin told her to take it slow and reminded her that he would be right beside her if she needed anything. He knew that Sarah was a bit clumsy, but once she got the hang of something, she would become quite skilled. It had been a long time since Jin had gone fishing. The last time he had fished for Ayu was when the adults had taken him on a trip. He decided to try his luck around the area with the black rock. He cast his line thinking that it would take some time to catch anything, and doubting that he would immediately snag a fish. However, just as he was thinking that, something pulled on his line and he let out a surprise sound. Sarah asked what was wrong, and with a shocked expression, Jin exclaimed that he had already caught one. Sarah and Kaito were stunned, as they had only just started. With Kaito's net, they were able to retrieve their first Ayu. Sarah, who was seeing the fish for the first time, and Kaito, who was thrilled that an Ayu had been caught using a lure, were both excitedly loud. Kaito asked Jin for the secret to his success, wondering if he had used a special technique like drifting or shaking the line. Jin replied that he had caught the fish right after casting his line, and that it was almost as if the Ayu had let itself be caught. Kaito jokingly attributed it to beginner's luck, and Sarah exclaimed that it didn't count. Soon after, it was Kaito's turn to snag an Ayu, and he asked Jin for help. Holding the net, Jin told him to relax, and he carefully guided the Ayu into the net. Kaito celebrated, thrilled that he had caught an Ayu using a lure, something he had previously doubted was possible. Jin couldn't believe that they had been dragged out of the house by Kaito on a whim, but it seemed to be paying off. Kaito looked proud and asked Jin how many fish he had caught so far. Jin proudly replied that he had already caught 3, joking that messing up someone else's territory was his specialty. The two then checked on Sarah, who was concentrating intensely, but also radiating a killing intent that was scaring off the fish around her. Kaito could feel and see how intimidating Sarah was, and it was clear that the fish were avoiding her. Jin sighed and called out to Sarah, telling her how tense she was. Sarah exclaimed that she also wanted to catch a fish, but despite her best efforts, she wasn't getting any bites. She blamed her abilities and decided to focus even harder, but her concentration was creating ripples in the water, scaring off the fish. Jin then tapped Sarah on the shoulder, and when she turned around, he playfully poked her cheek with his finger. Sarah was taken aback by Jin's sudden action, and she froze, looking flustered. Jin laughed, amused that his plan had worked. Sarah exclaimed that she was struggling, and Jin told her to relax, explaining that her intensity was scaring off the fish. He knew that she had bad experiences with fishing in the past, but he asked her to try to relax this time. Sarah looked depressed, recalling the words of the fisherman from her previous world, who had told her she wasn't suited for fishing. Jin wondered how harshly she had been scolded back then. Jin then asked Sarah to relax while fishing, explaining that putting too much pressure on it would only scare off the fish. Sarah understood and asked for more advice. Jin suggested targeting the energetic Ayu, which tended to take their territory seriously. Sarah asked how to identify the energetic ones, and Jin explained that large Ayu with yellow markings were called oiboshi and were known to be energetic and healthy. However, it was difficult to pick them out among the other fish swimming around. Sarah quickly took Jin's words of advice to heart and immediately spotted the oiboshi that Jin had described. She decided to fish in that area, and Jin asked if she could see the oiboshi. Sarah claimed that she could clearly see each individual Ayu, and Jin was amazed by her incredible eyesight, which seemed to be yet another one of her otherworldly abilities. Jin then asked Sarah to keep her mana and intensity under control while fishing. Sarah worriedly asked Jin to stay beside her while she fished, fearing that she would unconsciously start testing again if she was alone. She apologized, knowing that Jin also wanted to fish. Jin was fine with it, and decided to stay beside Sarah. Sarah was glad and thanked him, blushing slightly. Kaito, who had been silently listening to the two, finally realized the reason why his blockhead friend was changing. It was all thanks to Sarah, and Kaito was deeply moved. The fishing continued, and Jin soon noticed Sarah tensing up again. She gave him a gentle hand chop, and Sarah apologized. Just then, Sarah's rod started tugging, and Jin wondered what was wrong. Sarah claimed she felt something, and suddenly the line started tugging hard. Sarah was surprised and exclaimed that she had a bite. Jin told her not to lift her rod and to make sure that the hook was snagged tight. Jin then went to get the net and scooped up the first Ayu that Sarah caught. Jin then told Sarah that it was her first catch. Sarah was overjoyed and jumped in place. Jin claimed Sarah did well and told her to try touching it. Sarah lifted the line that hooked the Ayu and had her own celebration. Jin looked glad seeing Sarah smile again. Kaito then walked towards the two and was surprised to see a beautiful oiboshi. Seeing how huge it was, Kaito called it a great catch. Sarah was glad she finally caught one and thanked Jin for it. Jin was glad that Sarah had become positive again. Kaito then claimed they would have salt-grilled fish later. In the end, it was all about food. The trio ended up with 2 pails worth of Ayu, and the guys stared at them in amazement. They had caught an incredible amount of fish, with over half of them caught by Sarah. After she caught her first Ayu, she kept snagging one after another. As Jin had expected, once Sarah got used to something, she would immediately master it. Sarah then returned, holding stones that they would need to grill the caught Ayu. Kaito was worried seeing a girl carry the rocks, but Sarah was fine with it. Her anticipation was driving her crazy and she couldn't help but take the initiative. She asked if there was something else to prepare before they grilled the fish. Kaito smirked while reaching out to his bag, claiming that he was prepared. He pulled out everything they needed to grill the Ayu. Sarah found it incredible, and as Jin had expected, Kaito was really prepared. Kaito wondered if Sarah had grilled fish before. She shared how she had grilled a fish before when bivouacking during an expedition. Kaito was left confused by the rare word, and Jin explained that it was about camping or something. Jin offered to prepare the fish and asked Kaito to handle the rest. He then scolded Sarah and asked her not to say things that would make Kaito suspicious of her origins. Sarah apologized. Kaito then asked where the matches were so he could start a fire. Jin pointed out where they were, but Sarah exclaimed that she could help by using magic. Kaito was confused hearing the word magic. Jin quickly covered Sarah's mouth and exclaimed that Sarah meant matches. Jin gave Sarah a glare in silence. Soon after, their fire got stable and Jin and Sarah delivered the prepared fish. Kaito apologized for taking so long. With the fish prepared and skewered, it was time for them to grill. The skewers were stabbed in between the stones near the fire. Kaito still couldn't believe they had caught so many Ayu. Drooling, Sarah claimed she could eat 10 of them. Then her stomach growled like a lion's roar. Kaito laughed at her impressive appetite. Jin hoped that 10 would be enough after he heard Sarah's stomach growling. Everything was set up and the fish started grilling. Jin explained to Sarah that cooking salt-grilled Ayu required grilling at high temperatures but not directly in the flames. All they needed to do was wait. Sarah asked how long it would take. Given the size of the Ayu they caught, Jin claimed it would take 30 to 40 minutes. Sarah was surprised by how long it was. Jin understood how she felt and advised her to think of it as the cost of good food. Sarah didn't have a choice but to endure. Since they had time to waste, Kaito asked the couple about how they met. However, Jin quickly refused to share details. 40 minutes later, the salt-grilled Ayu were already showing signs of being cooked. Sarah and Kaito were drooling with expectant looks on their faces, surrounded by the savory smell. The two frustratedly asked how long they needed to wait. Jin just smiled, and he himself couldn't wait any longer. He then confirmed that the Ayu were now grilled and told them to start eating. Sarah then picked up one skewer, and it was at the perfect temperature. Sarah carefully took a bite of the grilled Ayu and enjoyed the delicious taste in silence. The grilled fish looked delicious while steaming. Sarah noticed how it was crispy on the outside but soft on the inside. She could taste the salt well, making it delicious. Kaito exclaimed that eating salt-grilled fish was what life was all about. Jin commented that he was exaggerating, but Kaito pointed out that Jin ate more than the rest of them. Seeing the two having a friendly banter, Sarah couldn't help but laugh. The three of them continued enjoying the salt-grilled Ayu while having a fun conversation. After their meal, they put out the fire and washed the skewers. The three then relaxed by dipping their feet in the cool flowing water. Sarah commented on how stuffed she was. Jin could see Kaito feeling wonderful as he slept. Jin then asked if Sarah enjoyed their fishing session. Sarah claimed she could still feel the feeling of snagging the fish. Jin also commended Sarah for preparing the fish. Sarah claimed she was always tasked to prepare the fish before since she was bad at fishing. Jin then assumed Sarah could make her own fish-based dishes in the future. Sarah asked if she could, and Jin told her to give it a shot if she wanted to. Sarah asked him to leave things to her since she would definitely make a wonderful fish dish for Jin. Jin smiled, seeing Sarah happy. However, Kaito's suspicious movement caught Jin's attention. Kaito was silently smiling while being a troublesome shipper of the two. Jin knew that Kaito was faking his sleep and splashed water on him. Kaito complained about how cold it was and exclaimed that he was only enjoying the talk between the newlyweds. Sarah was flustered hearing the word newlyweds. That is the end of the recap at chapter 60. Please read the pinned comment about the next part.